Rose sang along to the song from almost 30 years ago that was playing on the oldie station she favored. It was from the year she was 18, just on the cusp of adulthood. In fact, she remembered hearing it as she and Charlie made love for the very first time. Her smile widened. They were both 18, ready to take on the world. And, if truth be told, there was very little love involved that summer, but a lot of lust. They screwed everywhere they could find a flat surface and privacy. One of her favorite remembrances from that summer after high school was of her and Charlie, naked on a quilt spread over hay bales in the loft of one of his uncle's barns. They were bathed in the light of a full moon shining in the open hay doors, the light softening their features, as they enjoyed their third coupling of the night. They later cuddled, quilt wrapped around them, while he pointed out a fox slinking across a meadow, and they listened to an owl, probably upset because they had invaded his home. But after every summer comes autumn, and they both went off to college, him to a state university to get his degree in agribusiness and her to a college 3 states away, on full scholarship, to earn a degree in accounting. They hooked up briefly their first summer back, but then she took internships every summer until she graduated, only then coming home because the best job offer she had came from the largest local bank. Despite living in the same community, they really didn't cross paths again for 2 years, when he used her bank to leverage a business deal. There was little discussion over what direction his career would take. His family owned 4 of the largest farms in the area, held in a complicated trust. They also had a large feed, seed, and fertilizer store, 4 large commercial farms, where he ended up being assistant manager. When his father died from a massive heart attack a year later, Charlie was his only heir, and besides the stake in the family business, he was the beneficiary of a very large life insurance policy and the liquid assets of his father. When the deal was done, Charlie had no stake in the farm operation any longer, but the feed store and a small, 200-acre section that was part of the original holdings his great-grandfather 3 times over bought over 200 years before were completely his, plus a good nest egg, which he immediately spent, buying another store 80 miles away, and adding a franchised hardware store to both locations, cracking the retail market. His skill and education stood him good stead, and his yearly profits were easily 3 times what he would have earned off the farms by the 4th year. There was a little grumbling from the cousins, but all had signed off on the deal, so they had no recourse but to accept it. Rose had been appointed his coordinator for the bank, and they renewed their friendship over the following months. Working lunches turned into working dinners, which turned into breakfasts after spending the night together. No one was surprised when 18 months later, in a country Baptist church his family had attended for 7 generations, on a warm April afternoon, Rose Cheney became Mrs. Charlie Barton. After a honeymoon at a clothing-optional resort, they came home with a lot of memories and no tan line. Charlie then gave Rose her wedding present, the seed money to open her own office, with his businesses as the very first clients. It included a post-nup that excluded him from all profits earned. There had been a similar clause in the paperwork when he bought the stores, added by his family to make sure if something happened or he wanted to sell it, the family could buy it back without complication should he ever marry and divorce. Charlie had no reason to object at the time, as it was before he and Rose were serious. It was at his insistence that her clause was included. Now, all those years later, Rose had 8 offices in 2 states and traveled 1 week a month to the different branches. She was no longer an accountant, but a CEO and administrator. Charlie owned 4 stores now, and his annual income was just over 7 figures, and her net was about half that annually. That was big money by anyone's standards, especially in this rural community, where the county seat held only 40,000 people, and there was only one more town, a hamlet of just over 6,000, just a few miles from her house. She laughed as the song ended. Now they were considered the redneck elite of their community, well off without the snobbery that came with money. They belonged to a country club, but never became the country club type. She wheeled into the driveway of their 4-bedroom home, sighing because they hadn't been able to fill them with children. There had been a complication during the birth of their daughter, and she could no longer bear children. Instead, they lavished their love on their only child, while at the same time making sure she grew into a sensible, responsible adult. She had just graduated college, and now the home was a true empty nest. Her heels clacked as she walked through the stone foyer. Shoes were her one big indulgence since they became wealthy. Rose reckoned she had 60 pairs of just heels, and her annual shopping trip was coming up. Every year she went to Atlanta, Charlotte, and twice Miami to update her wardrobe, which mainly meant new shoes. She always took her mother and daughter, who was more enthusiastic about it now than when she was younger. Charlie tended to dress in LL Bean and the clothes his hardware stores sold, but he had a closet of very nice suits for when the need arose. He was only 15 pounds heavier now than when they married, and she was actually smaller, thanks to her time with personal trainers. Yes, she thought, as she walked to the kitchen. They were rich, still attractive, had a great kid. Life was just perfect. Thursday was takeout night, and her nose told her tonight was Chinese, her favorite. Next would be Italian, barbecue, a burger from the small diner in the next town, fish, or something from whatever new place had just opened up. Rose thought it odd the food was still boxed, and Charlie was sitting on the patio, watching the sunset. Grabbing a couple of plates, she loaded them, carrying them out to the table. Noting he already had a glass and a pitcher of sweet tea, she grabbed another glass and utensils and settled down beside him, somewhat surprised he hadn't kissed her, and totally puzzled when she leaned over and he turned, so she caught his cheek. Instantly concerned, because that was so unlike him, she asked how his day went. Still staring out over the fields, he answered. It was pretty boring in the morning, but I had an interesting lunch date. Rose smiled. Everyone wanted something from Charlie, from the 14-year-old girl in the FFA who wanted him to address her group, to the 80-year-old retired librarian who wanted him to donate enough money to put his name on the building, to vendors and retail customers. He usually treated them to lunch as they talked. Normally pretty steady, he did have occasional moments of weakness, like when one precocious 10-year-old told him he ought to donate the equipment, seeds, and the time from someone who knew what they were doing to make a school garden. He was so impressed. He leased the field adjacent to the school and divided it until every class had a plot. Then he sent over the tillers and tools to work the spot, with 2 retired farmers to run the project, doing only what the children couldn't, then showing how on the rest. Each class had to vote on what to plant, when to plant it, and each student had to spend at least 1 hour a week tending it. All harvest went to the school cafeteria, where once a week or more a meal was prepared using vegetables the children had raised. In a move unusual for someone who sold farm chemicals and fertilizers, he would only allow them to use organic materials. The program had started 10 years ago, and the girl who suggested it was now working with the retired farmers teaching as part of her college requirements. Her schooling was completely paid by Charlie, including living expenses. There was no pretense, no disguised scholarships, just a blunt, "I believe in you," followed by financial arrangements. In return, she had to work for him for 4 years after graduating. She called him Uncle Charlie now and would literally kill for him. Charlie wasn't a saint for all his compassion. He was known to abrupt to people who annoyed him, and he had no use for someone who tried to cheat in a business dealing or manipulate personal relationships. Slow to anger, when he reached that stage, he tended to be ruthless both in public and personal matters. And as he never forgot a kindness, he never forgot a slight. Somebody must have gotten out of line at lunch, she thought, as she relaxed. Woe be unto them, as their preacher was fond of saying. Was she a pretty young thing? Or some grumpy old fart with his hand out? Quite attractive, actually, Amanda Peterson. Rose felt a little chill, both over who he had lunch with and his tone of voice. He was speaking very softly, his angry voice, she knew from experience. He got up, walking to the end of the patio, looking at the small lake he had built and stocked. What did you talk about, dear? Sex. Sex? Why in the world would a 24-year-old woman talk to you about sex? He turned, looking her dead in the eye. Her heart leaped to her throat, and with an air of fatalism she listened. Well, it seems she and Bobby are going to have an open marriage. From what I gather, it was his idea, and he'd spent weeks getting her to agree with it. She just wanted to know, since you were going to be his first partner, and since we were so understanding and happy with our own open marriage, if I would be her first too, because she thought I'd be gentle with her. We talked a long time, Rose. The poor girl is really confused and scared. But by the time we were done, she wasn't scared anymore. She was pissed. Might want to tell Bobby to watch for a guy to serve him tomorrow, and you should watch out yourself. What the hell were you thinking, fishing in the company pond? She's gonna pop a lawsuit the size of Texas on you. This is still an alienation of affection state. It's gonna suck to be you soon. Now, what I want you to do is look me in the eye and tell me this is all bullshit from a couple of scam artists, that you've never done any of the things she told me today, and you're willing to counter-sue and send their butts to jail. Because if even the tiniest part is true, you and I are done. You understand me? Done. I'll send bloodhounds from hell down your back trail, and I'll find every dirty little secret you've ever had all the way back to grade school. Now is the time when you start ranting about being so unfairly accused. Go ahead. Rose sat in shock, her head reeling, trying to form coherent sentences and failing. No, not now. How could this have possibly happened? Bobby said she was good with it. Damn it. Charlie stood and watched for about a minute before speaking. I thought so. I am leaving now. I think I'll stay at the farm for a while. Don't try to talk to me, call me, email me, Don't even send me a smoke signal. We'll talk when I am ready, not before. Goddamn you, Rose. Damn you. Rose didn't know how long it took her to move, but by that time, she could hear his truck fading into the distance. She sat back down, looking at the plates of food, too shocked to cry. 2 hours later, the food was useless, covered with flies. The sunset had faded into a cloudy night. Not a star to be seen, no beacons of hope she could latch onto. She got up, leaving the mess for the housekeeper. Rose went straight to the liquor cabinet, considering the choices. For someone who rarely drank, he had quite a large selection. She smiled when she saw the bottle of rye, his favorite, still only half empty after 6 months. She frowned when she noticed the bottle of vodka she liked best was almost empty. Might as well do it in, she thought, turning up the bottle until it was gone, and opening another bottle. Carrying a large tumbler holding almost half a pint, she filled it the rest of the way with ice and tonic, carrying it into the kitchen, where she added 3 slices of lime. For some undefined reason, she went back out to the patio. Raising her glass to the east, she said, "Good night, Charlie." Then Rose cried and drank, repeating the routine until she stopped crying and passed out. "Rose, Rose, are you all right? Wake up." She came to her senses as their housekeeper shook her gently. She was sprawled on a lounge chair, in a not very ladylike position. Her skirt had ridden up, exposing her. She snapped awake, taking the scene in, the food still on the table, a bottle of vodka, sitting there surrounded by lime wedges. The bottle was half empty. She had a headache, but wasn't hungover. Rose had simply succumbed to emotional exhaustion. She gathered her thoughts, smiling weakly at Mrs. Gannon, the housekeeper. A widow, in her 60s, she worked 4 days a week, 6 hours a day. She and Charlie were neat people, so it didn't take Mrs. Gannon long to keep the place in top shape. And she was a relative, Charlie's great aunt. Charlie hired her because she needed the extra income and put her on salary, making sure she got a full paycheck no matter how long or little she worked. He even tried to get her to move in to one of the spare bedrooms, but she refused, preferring to keep her apartment. "Sorry, Shirley. Got a little carried away last night. Come on, let me help clear this up. I can't believe Charlie left you out here like this. When he gets home, I'm gonna give him a talking to. Charlie wasn't here last night. This is all on me. Just had a lot on my mind." Shirley was old, but there was nothing wrong with her mind. She looked at the 2 plates, the 2 glasses of tea, and knew Charlie had been there for at least part of the evening. The thought shocking her. It looked like there may be some trouble in paradise. The physical evidence, plus the fact that she had found Rose semi-passed out, led her to all kinds of speculation. She couldn't help but wonder about the hose. She did their laundry most of the time, and had never seen anything like that in the wash. Maybe it was some kind of midlife crisis thing. "You go on in, Rose. Get cleaned up. You're not working today?" With a start, Rose realized she was late. Good thing she owned the place. She called her manager and her personal assistant, telling them she would be in after lunch and to rearrange her appointments. A long hot shower helped. She looked at her reflection, thinking a little vainly how good she still looked while most of her friends had entered the dumpy housewife phase. Fighting to maintain control, she sat at the vanity, brushing her hair, reflecting on how she ended up in this mess. She took to business like a duck to water. Using the money Charlie gave her as a wedding present, she had opened her first office. Charlie, of course, gave her his business. When the accounting firm his cousins used in the family business closed due to retirement, she got that business. Things progressed nicely, and in 2 years, she opened another office in the county seat. The next year, she opened an office in the town next to Charlie's second store. In 12 years, she had 5 offices. She added 3 more over time. She could have opened more, but she had to travel 1 week a month, and she didn't like the idea of being away from home any more than necessary. The small county she lived in was dry, so there were no places other than a few fraternal orders and the country club to socialize over a drink. It was one of the things she missed most. She enjoyed the bar and club scene at college a little too much, truth be told. But she was settled down now, no bar crawls or staggering out of clubs in her future any longer. It had been 10 weeks since she and Charlie had made love. He had been sick, a serious case of flu, that put him out of action for 3 weeks. Then she had to travel for a week. As soon as she got back, he had to go out of town to finalize the purchase of his 3rd store. Then she got the flu. By the time she recovered, she had to go back on the road. It was the longest dry spell they'd ever had in their marriage. Just over 40, they still enjoyed a robust sex life, 2 to 5 times a week, depending on opportunity. They still occasionally used the hayloft at the farm, just for fun. She would go to his office at lunchtime every once in a while. Charlie made her stay that way while he went through the drive-through a fast food place. The boy handing out their milkshakes nearly dropped them when she leaned over to get hers. They didn't even make it into the house when they got home. He dropped the tailgate of his truck, putting her at exactly the right height to receive him. They woke up the next morning smelling like vanilla shakes and sex. The town her new office was in was considerably larger than home, and she decided to treat herself to a night out. She cabbed so she wouldn't have to worry about how much she drank, and ended up at an all-male review. The alcohol, the hot bodies, and her pent-up desires did her in, and she took one of the strippers back to the hotel. He was 22, with great stamina. The next morning she was sore, hungover, and mortified. If Charlie even found out, she never went out the rest of the week and fell into Charlie's arms when she got home, ordering him to take the next day off. She mated with him in a mixture of shame, lust, and fear. It took her the rest of the month to calm down. The next week she traveled. She was back at the same club, taking the same stripper home with her. She played with him for 3 months, giving him little gifts, gold chains, a prepaid debit card so when they went out he could pay, that always had a few hundred extra left over. It would always be empty when she got to town, and she would reload it for him. He quit his job and left, but not before spending 2 days giving her all he had and introducing her to his replacement. Things did not go so well with him. They played on a Monday, and Wednesday he called. Seems one of his other playmates had given him a gift. She panicked, got checked, insisted on shots even though nothing showed up. She called Charlie and told him she'd found a serious problem with one of the accounts the office handled, and she was going to have to stay a few extra days to fix it. She felt like hell lying to her husband because she may or may not have the clap, and promised herself never again. She broke that promise 6 months later and would keep breaking her vows for the next 8 years. And then she got stupid, and Charlie found out. If she had to describe Bobby Peterson in one word, it would be yummy. He was tall, athletic, good-looking, and from the glimpses she got of the occasional bulge in his slacks, well endowed. It was the first time she had ever considered playing at home, and the years of hiding her affairs from Charlie made her arrogant. She would make Bobby her personal assistant, take him on her trips, and as before, only play when she was out of town. The signals were sent and received, and the flirting escalated. She had been around men like Bobby before, arrogant, inflated egos, self-centered. She was sure he had designs on her and her money, and it made her smile. He would never be a tenth the man Charlie was. Bobby was just a human sex toy, something to play with until he began to bore her. She would let him down gently, give him some very nice gifts, maybe even some money. If he got stupid and threatened her, she would make sure he understood how costly it could be to him. The wheels started coming off when his wife found their emails. How absolutely stupid could he be? Rose realized now she should have called it off right then, but he persuaded her he could handle his wife. She didn't know his plan until her life fell apart. But the last thing either of them expected was that Amanda Peterson would offer herself to Charlie. Rose stopped brushing her hair, lost in thought. Did she still want to be married to Charlie? Was it time to just pack it in and move on? Admittedly, the sex hadn't been anything exceptional the last few years, but he was comfortable as an old shoe, and when they made love, he put everything he had into it to please her. Maybe, a persistent little voice nagged, maybe if she'd held back some of the passion she gave to her lovers, it would have been better. Yes, she thought. She did want to stay married to Charlie. He was her soulmate, the man she wanted to see holding her on her deathbed. Life without him wasn't appealing. She needed to get him to understand none were ever a threat to us. They were just toys, to play with until she could get home to him. She had to try. Charlie pulled into the driveway of his farm, once again admiring the old, 2-story farmhouse sitting on the ridge, overlooking the farm below. When he got the property, it was in pretty bad shape. He even considered tearing it down. In the end, he decided to restore it, adding a lot of upgrades. The project took 3 years, because he had just started out in business and couldn't afford to do it all at once. Rose was in the midst of getting her new office up and running and paid little attention to what he was doing. Charlie suddenly realized that pretty much summed up their life together. Rose only paid attention when it concerned her directly. He'd been a little disappointed when he showed it to her, and all she said was it looked nice. He had considered making it their home, but by then his stores had really taken off. Rose had started realizing profits from her office, and she wanted to build something brand new, just for them and the children they expected to have. Rose wanted to wait until her office was sound financially, but the first quarter it showed black. She threw away her birth control pills. They hadn't married until they were 26. Now she was 28, and she told Charlie they needed to get a move on. She didn't want to still be having babies at 35. They had decided on 3, but when Faith was born, something had gone wrong, so she had her tubes tied. Charlie had wanted more, and even brought up adoption, but Rose quietly deflected the conversation until he dropped it. He had to admit, in his eyes, his daughter Faith was perfect. As Rose got more deeply involved with expanding her business, he spent more and more time with his daughter. He absolutely hated dropping her off to daycare. He had 5 women working for him full-time at the store, including the hardware store manager and 4 more part-time. He had 18 men working in the commercial end, mostly drivers and receiving. When he built a mid-sized building beside the store, they really didn't notice because he was always expanding. Many thought it was going to be an office. When it was done, he called all the people that worked for him to a meeting. I know you've all been curious about the new building. It's a daycare center for Barton Enterprises. It's not open to the public, it's only available to employees. His employees were stunned, especially when he gave them a tour. Capable of holding 50 children, with an extensive outdoor playground and a completely equipped kitchen, all state-of-the-art. One woman, her budget already stretched to the limit due to child care costs, asked what kind of prices he'd be charging. He grinned. Well, it's absolutely free, but you do get an employee discount. It took them a few minutes before they caught what he said. Then the tears started. Some of the men even sniffed. He was in effect giving them $100 plus raise per week. This was not quite the generous act most thought. Charlie did it specifically to have Faith close. So he hired 4 women and a part-time cook. The cook was given detailed instructions on the kind of lunches and snacks to be served. They had to be flavorful, nutritious, and sourced as locally as possible, and using the bare minimum of pre-packaged items. Soon the employees were clamoring to dine with their children, and he had to extend the cook's hours and add tables. When the number of meals hit 60, he hired her an assistant. Many ate outside if the weather was nice, on the tables scattered under the trees. Amazingly, close to half of the meals were vegetarian, and no one complained. He'd hired professional child care providers, and while much of their day was consumed by play, educational grounding was integrated. By the time many of them went to public schools, they could already read and write, and most knew basic Spanish, and good study habits were ingrained in them. The Bartonians, as the school system nicknamed them, tended to stick together, bonded through shared learning, maintaining friendships that lasted lifetimes. Plus, they skewed the performance test necessary every year, raising the school rating to the top. Manners were also instilled almost from birth, until please, thank you, and you're welcome became automatic responses. Of course, when his other stores found out, he had to duplicate it for them. He spent roughly $400,000 a year to maintain them, all out of his own pocket. Of course, he got a nice tax break. All this because Charlie wanted to keep Faith happy and close. He unlocked the door and decided to open a few windows and air the place out. The breeze felt so good he left them open for the night. Normally not a drinker, he'd remembered to stop and get a 12-pack, along with some coffee, creamer, a few snack items. He placed everything in the kitchen, stared at the beer for a minute, and made a cup of coffee. He took his cup outside, sitting in the porch swing, rocking slightly. He suddenly remembered cuddling Rose on this same swing. Right after the house was done, they were naked, giggling, looking at the barn, memories coming back. They'd had a lot of good times in barns. He half smiled at the memory, then sat back and reflected, wondering, trying to pinpoint any sign that should have told him his marriage was over. Looking back, he could not find one instance. Then he remembered a few smiles, and when he asked, she just said she was reliving a pleasant memory, but she never volunteered which memory it was. Was she thinking about her lovers then? His musings were interrupted by his phone. He'd forgotten to turn it off, and was about to do so when he saw the number. Hello? All he heard for a few seconds was sobbing, before she blurted out he'd hit her. Amanda, he said, in his CEO voice, who hit you? My husband. I told him about our lunch, and how I intended to leave him. He lost it and punched me in the face. What should I do? Are you out of the house? He got his tearful yes out of her. She was in her car. Good. Now, listen to me. Drive straight to the hospital. I'll be there as quick as I can. Do it, Amanda, if you want my help. Go on now. He hung up, glad he'd decided on coffee instead of beer. Once in the truck, he called the sheriff department on the non-emergency line. He got hold of the senior officer in charge and was assured a female deputy would be there when he arrived. He just barely beat the cruiser into the parking lot. Amanda burst out of the car and rushed up to him and the deputy. The whole left side of her face was swelled, and her eye was completely closed. A thin trickle of blood was still seeping from a corner of her mouth. They escorted her into the emergency room, and Charlie sat for 40 minutes, until the deputy came back out. She was a Bartonian, one of the originals. He's broken her cheekbone, Charlie. She wants to talk to you before she presses charges. What the heck is going on? Charlie shrugged, then told her a modified version of the truth. I had lunch with her today. I guess she needed a father figure to confide in. Her husband isn't a parent would-be swinger, and he was trying to get her on board with the idea. I gave her some advice I don't think he liked. Carla Martinez laughed out loud. Swingers? Are you serious? In our little burg? She wasn't expecting the pained look on his face. Sometimes, you don't really know people, Carla. They can hit you with all kinds of nasty surprises. Come on, let's go talk to her. Amanda was on painkillers, looking wan and pale. She tried to smile when she saw him, but winced in pain. What do I do, Charlie? First, you file charges. If you don't, I won't have anything to do with you ever again. You didn't deserve this, Amanda, and you can't let him get away with it. Has he ever done this before? She flinched, but nodded. Not like this, but he has slapped me a couple of times. Charlie looked over at Carla. You hearing this? Go get that a-hole. Carla looked at him in surprise. In all the years she had known him, going back to when she was 8, she'd never heard him curse. Her cop instincts kicked in, and she knew there was something deeper going on. I can't. Charlie. First, she has to give a statement and agree to press charges. Until she does that, our hands are tied, and she has to tell the truth. Charlie looked over at Amanda, knowing that her safety was more important than his pride. She will. Anything you want to know. Right, Amanda? But Charlie, no buts. Your safety means more to me than anything else, understand? Now, I'll leave the room so you can give your statement to Officer Martinez. And I'll be back when you're done to check on you. Thanks, Carla, for doing this. He walked out, leaving 2 stunned women. Carla feared the worst. If this man, who she respected more than anyone she had ever met, was having an affair with this young woman, she would be shocked. But police work had taught her to expect the worst. 45 minutes later, she walked into the waiting room and gave Charlie a tremendous hug when he stood up, not saying anything. When she let go, she stepped back. Good thing the waiting room was empty. It's a routine domestic disturbance. They argued. He hit her. That's all the report needs to say. Understand, Charlie? He gripped her hand. Thanks for the concern. But if push comes to shove, and you need to elaborate to get a conviction, do it. Now, how is she? Can she leave? No, she has to stay overnight, so they can monitor her for a concussion. She's gonna need a ride tomorrow, and a place to stay. We can put her up in a shelter for a couple of days, then she'll have to find a place. His father owns the house, so she's out. But she can go over tomorrow to pick up anything she wants. I am sure he won't be there, at least for a couple of days. He walked back inside, checked on Amanda, finding her asleep, and left. What a day, he thought wearily. When he got home, he set his alarm and was out in minutes. His eyes popped open when the alarm went off. Surprised he didn't recognize the bed. It all came back to him. He showered, called his assistant, and told her he probably wouldn't be in that day. She was used to him being called out of town suddenly before, and made nothing of it. Well, let's see. I find my wife is a cheating 304 going back who knows how long. Her erstwhile lover tried to talk his wife into screwing around, so he could do my wife. When she refuses, they argue, and he tries to knock her face off. She's in the hospital, he's in jail, and my wife? Don't know or care, and not the least interested in finding out. He grimaced over his thoughts. Charlie decided to stop at the diner for breakfast. He wasn't there long before Officer Martinez walked in, stopping for a meal at the end of her shift. She went right up to him, leaning down and kissing his cheek. The staff and diners broke out in grins as he flamed red. It was pretty well known how easily he blushed, a fact that most of the female Bartonians took advantage of, especially if their husbands were present. They did it out of love and humor, and everyone took it as the joke it was. She slid into the booth. Buy a poor public servant breakfast, money bags, and I am having steak and eggs. He grinned as she placed the order. After the crowd thinned and she was done eating, she quietly filled him in on the end of her night. He was cussing and ranting when he opened the door, thinking it was Amanda. He shut right up when he saw me and Officer Wells. Officer Wells was one of their biggest officers, and he got called to a lot of domestic situations. It was standard to send a male or female team to such things. He started out again when we cuffed him, ranting about Amanda, Rose, and you. We read him his rights, advising him to just shut up. He was processed in about 4. It'll probably be 10 before Daddy can arrive with the lawyers. Amanda is still in the hospital and won't be released until after lunch, so she'll have to get an escort to collect her things. The office has been notified, so if she gives them a 2-hour window, she can get it done anytime in the next 48 hours. Standard cooler time in a domestic abuse allegation. She's got nowhere to go. Charlie, her family lives 2 states away. You gonna help her? Not directly. That would be putting fuel on the fire. Follow me to the office before you go home to bed. It's on the way, and it won't take long. She followed him and waited outside. He went into his office, past his surprised assistant, telling her he'd forgotten something. He opened the safe he had there, getting out $3,000 in cash. Walking back outside, he leaned in the window, dropping the small bag on the floor. This afternoon, have whoever escorts her take her back to your apartment complex. There's like 6 cops living there, right? Take what's in this bag and give it to her. Tell her not to flash it around or talk about where it comes from. There's enough in there for her to get an apartment and to live on for a month, if she needs it. Once again, I'll owe you. I promise, somewhere down the line, I'll pay. Carla did as she was told, and 18 months later, when she married, Charlie walked her down the aisle. He'd paid for everything, the wedding, the honeymoon, even the tickets for her grandparents to fly in from Mexico. He kissed her cheek during the father-daughter dance, thanking her once again for her help. She cried all over him when he told her that he knew a perfect house available for a young couple to start their lives in, and private financing to help them afford it. Amanda safe, Charlie left, going to his most distant store to spend a few days. Rose got over her shock by the 3rd day. Smart enough to not push, she called him once on his cell, and at every one of his stores, sent 2 emails, one to his laptop he never traveled without, and one to the desktops at every store, and waited. 2 weeks later, she had almost stopped exercising and had gained 10 pounds. Her hair needed styling, and the way she wore her clothes made her look frumpy. She decided to go back to the gym. It was one of her ex-lovers, a trainer at the gym she used when she was out of state, that shocked her back to reality. When he dragged her into the office and sat her down, the dam burst, and she told him the whole story. Well, shit, Rose, what did you expect? You weren't particularly discreet, around here anyway, not at first. The truth is like a seed. Honey, sooner or later it'll find the light and grow. What do you want to happen here? I want my husband back. Why? There was obviously something lacking in your relationship, or you wouldn't have been doing the things you did. You're rich, he's rich. It would be a wash for any type of settlement. Your child is a grown woman, so that's not a factor. You go your way, and play with anybody you like, and he'll go his way. Of course, from what you told me in years of experience, he's the type to seek a long-term relationship. Honey, that man will be married again before your divorce is a year old. Not to hurt your feelings, but I got the feeling he was just someone you were comfortable with, someone to fall back on between flings. He stopped, out of breath. Now, no matter where you land, you need to get yourself together. So get your butt out there and sweat it off. I am calling Gabriel, you need a trim, and you got a little gray showing. I'll make sure he'll be available in an hour. She smiled for the first time since that Thursday night on the patio. How about dinner tonight, Eric? We could remember old times. Sorry, babe, not gonna happen. You're still hot, but I am married now, my 3rd. And I've decided if this one crashes it won't be because I couldn't keep my excitement off. And from everything you told me, your husband is an Old Testament type. Eventually, whether you end up back together or not, he's going to want blood, and I don't like pain. If you've still got some friends on the side, you need to warn them. I wish you the best. Now, get to sweating. Rose thought about it while she worked out. He was right. She needed to warn a couple of guys. The rest were far enough back in her past, she thought they were safe. If Charlie ever found out she'd had 8 lovers in the last 10 years, she was toast. And for some reason she couldn't understand, she still loved her husband and desperately wanted him back. Charlie sat on the front porch of his farmhouse. He'd been there 2 weeks now, and the rumors were starting to swirl. It didn't bother him much. He doubted seriously anyone had the nerve to say anything directly. The sheriff had stopped by to shoot the breeze. They were friends, grew up together, and when they grew older, they would take 1 or 2 fishing trips a year, one to the coast, another to a lake known for their record catfish. The sheriff even had a framed photo of them on the wall of his office, after a really successful trip, each holding a huge catfish. Sheriff Andy always rubbed it in his fish was 10 pounds heavier, going over 70 pounds. Charlie made coffee, and they relived old times for a few minutes. Finally, Andy brought up what was on his mind. You know, Charlie, people are starting to talk. You've been here for over 2 weeks by yourself, and Rose, the few times she's been seen, looks like shit. It's all tied up somehow with Amanda Peterson and her husband. He's up on spousal abuse charges, and Amanda has filed for divorce. Everyone is wondering how she can afford the shark that's representing her. He's threatening to file an alienation of affection suit on you if she doesn't back off. So tell me as a friend, What's going on here? So Charlie told him, omitting details. Andy's mouth hung open, hardly believing what he was hearing. So that's the full story. Amanda opened my eyes, and while I hate the news, I am glad she told me. So yeah, I am footing the bill for her divorce, as a thank you. The most intimate we've ever been is when she kissed me on the cheek after she got out of the hospital. She's younger than Faith, for God's sake. So screw him. Tell him to do his worst, but remind him if he pushes, I'll push back harder. The sheriff reflected a little as he drove away. He would never have thought Rose would cheat on Charlie. He'd gone to school with them, been the best man at their wedding. Faith called him Uncle Andy, and she was probably 12 before she understood he wasn't really her blood relative. His daughter was her best friend. She even went to daycare with her, the only non-employee related child in the history of the facility. A patrol officer at the time, the freedom from childcare bills helped them tremendously. The girls were inseparable until college, and resumed the friendship when they both returned home. This was going to be hard on her. He knew she'd automatically turn to Charlie. He had practically raised her while Rose got her business off the ground. Charlie was much more a presence than Rose in the community, and he knew if it came to choosing sides, Rose would be out in the cold. He hoped it wouldn't come to that. This had the makings of a true mess. Rose was shocked when she got the email. She had gotten to the point that she felt he was never going to talk to her again. She expected a process server to show up any day now. The email was short and to the point. Why? She sent him a long email stating her love for him, how much she missed him, and begged him to see her so they could talk face to face. He sent her another one-word message. Why? This went on for several days until he agreed to meet face to face after she answered the question. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to do in her life. She must have rewritten it a dozen times, even went to a counselor for advice, and had a college boy working on a master's in English to help her polish it until she felt it set the perfect tone. He was cute, tall, a killer smile, and he seemed to enjoy flirting with her. She was sizing him up. She had never been with a man that young. When it hit her what she was doing, she stopped immediately, but gave him double his fee and made sure she kept his card with his email and number. Satisfied, she sent it off. Dearest Charlie, you have no idea how hard this is to write. How do you justify hurting the man you've shared life with for the last 30 years? The man who gave you a child. The man who loved you. You can't. I have no explanation. I've seen an expert a couple of times for insight. I didn't like her opinions. She alluded to possible hormone imbalances, a midlife crisis, empty nest syndrome all being factors, but in the end, I did it because I could. I never flaunted it, and until my recent stupidity, kept it far away from you. I knew you were a proud man, and it would wound you deeply. You have reacted so far just as I thought you would. I know, with just a phone call or two, you could easily destroy me, make me a social pariah in our community, maybe even turn our daughter against me. But I also know you're too good a man to do anything like that. If you decide to divorce me, you'll do it quietly and with dignity. I know you too well, Charlie. But know this, Charlie. I never once stopped loving you. Even during my playdates, I couldn't stop thinking about getting home to you, snuggling into your arms on the patio, watching the sunset. I'd rewrite history today if I could, erase all this ugliness and go back to our quiet, happy life. But I doubt seriously God is going to give me a do-over. Please, Charlie, don't ask me for times or details. I don't want to inflict any more pain than I already have. The end would be the same if it were just 1 or 100. But know this, I will do anything, absolutely anything, to reconcile. Want to whip my butt on Main Street? I'll show up at high noon on Saturday, ready to bend over. Want me to give up my business and be a housewife for the rest of my life? I'll put the businesses up for sale tomorrow and get rid of them even if I have to take a loss. I'll do anything, Charlie, anything, to be in your arms one more time. Now, send me the time and where you want to meet. I love you, Charlie. I always will. Rose. She signed, hit send, and shut her laptop. It was up to Charlie and God now. Charlie read through the email 4 times, getting angrier every time. Just because she could? They didn't mean anything? She still loved him? Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. And the line, whether it was 1 or 100, told him right away there was more than one. It was all he needed to know. He took a quiet trip, out of state, to the biggest town his wife had an office in. He had his lawyer reach out, and he had the names of the 3 most respected private investigation firms in the city. He met with all, and hired 2 of them. On the off chance one group would discover more than another, he did the same thing at all her locations. He paid top dollar, and gave bonuses for speedy work. He had one directive: dig up every square inch of dirt in your area. If you need help, hire them. If you find someone you suspect had an affair with my wife, find out everything you can, as far back as you have to go, and give it to me. The two firm owners had a dinner meeting. They knew and respected each other, and were admittedly a little concerned about what they were doing. What do you think he's trying to gain here, Jack? I don't think he's trying to gain anything. I think he's a man in deep pain. I think maybe he's trying to understand why she cheated on him. He stopped, sipping his tea. I am sure you did what I did, Chuck, and checked him out. No history of violence, a well-respected member of the community. You have to dig pretty deep to find anyone who has a bad word about him. And the ones that do almost universally lost something from tangling with him. I am sure most deserved it. And his random acts of kindness are almost legendary, even though he tries to keep them quiet. They sat silently for a minute or two. He may be exactly like he looks on paper, but they had been in their field for a long time, and had learned that people were almost never what they seemed. Plus, as they both knew, random acts of kindness was one of the biggest tells for sociopaths. Chuck finally broke the silence. Well, we know he's worth about $30 million. At least 20 of that is in liquid assets. So let's just keep an eye out and do what he's paying us for. If he goes off the rails, we'll try to deal with it. And if it gets out of hand, well, then we call the cops. Agreed? Absolutely, responded Jack. But they both had reservations. Neither had seen such coldness in anyone's eyes as Charlie had when he talked about his wife's possible lovers. Oh hell, Bobby Peterson thought, when he woke up in jail. It wasn't supposed to be like this at all. It was just going to be some mutual playing. No one was supposed to get pissed. He couldn't believe it. His boss was hitting on him, and she was hot, especially for her age and richer than shit. Bobby saw an opportunity and flirted back. When she called him into her office at quitting time that day, he was excited. But nothing happened except some pretty blatant flirting and a few light touches. But he was patient. She flirted a little harder as the weeks went by, taking him into her office, stroking him lightly over his slacks while they kissed before screwing the hell out of her. It went to pieces when one of the secretaries came back into the office to pick up her umbrella. Good thing her office door was closed. Rose pulled back, straightening her dress and suggesting it may in their best interest to leave. He could go first, and she'd close the office in 30 minutes or so. He gave her a kiss and a grope on the way out. He grinned on the way home. He'd owned that which before long. Rose complained about the travel and the increased workload brought on by the new office. Maybe she should take on an assistant, him for instance. Look at the money they would save on motel bills if they slept together, something he'd make sure of. Bobby had a plan. His father had never given him the respect he was due, calling him lazy, unimaginative, always looking for the path of least resistance. Hell, he'd even fired him, just for using the petty cash to pay for lunch. Of course, he used it almost every day for a year before he got caught. Almost $2,500. Well, he did like to eat in the more upscale places. He tried to justify it as a business expense, but no one bought it. Dad gave him a choice. Repay the money, or leave. He left. Wait until he weans Rose Barton away from her husband, and replaces him in her bed and her life. And her money. That would make him pay attention. Sure, the witch was over 20 years older, but she was still pretty hot, and more importantly, pretty rich. In 5 years or so, the old witch will slow down, and he'd find a little playmate. Or two. She might even go along with it to give her a chance to rest. When he controlled the money, he'd shove it up his dad's butt, make him know he had it in him the whole time. Show him, by God. It all came apart when his witch of a wife got suspicious. Even being dumb as a stump, she had that woman thing going, and she kept digging until she found their emails. That's when he turned on the charm, telling her he was just doing it for them, that he didn't even like the witch. It took a few weeks, but she was coming around. In fact, he suggested she seek out a sugar daddy. It couldn't hurt, and maybe she could get a bundle. Between them, they would get the seed money to open their own business. She could be his secretary. That was what she was going to community college for, before he plucked her out and married her. How was he supposed to know she would pick out Charlie Barton to try to seduce? When he reacted badly, she started sobbing and spilled the whole scheme, including the detail that the next week Rose was taking Bobby with her to visit her out-of-state offices. She screwed everything up. When she came home that night and told him she'd talked to Charlie to get verification that he was all right with the open marriage and wife swap plan, Charlie told her the truth, and Amanda had decided to leave him. They argued while Bobby drank steadily. He knew he was toast. He definitely wouldn't have a job by Monday, and probably wouldn't to get work in the community again. His father would ridicule him once again, and he knew no help would be forthcoming. He was screwed. And then there was the stupid cow Amanda, telling him she'd own his balls before the divorce was over. He finally lost it, slapping her to shut her up. Maybe he did hit her a little too hard, but it made her stop. She even left, leaving him in peace. He went back to his bottle of gin, racking his clouded mind to figure out he'd come out on top when the smoke cleared. Maybe he'd ask good old Charlie for a donation to assure the truth never got out. Yeah, that might work. 2 hours later, someone was pounding on the door. God damn it. Didn't they know it was the middle of the night? God damn it. Amanda, just get the hell away from me before I go to your butt again. I'll screw you. His drunken brain finally processed the fact that it wasn't Amanda, but 2 cops. And the male cop was huge. Robert Peterson? Yeah, what you want. It's the middle of the night and I am. That's all he got out before they had him on the ground cuffing him. Robert Peterson, you are under arrest for assault on Amanda Peterson. You have the right to. The woman cop went through the whole thing, but Bobby didn't hear it. The witch was having her arrested? It was just a tap. Now hold on a minute here. It was just a slap. Things got out of hand when we argued. I didn't hurt her. I bet that prick Barton put her up to this. Is it my fault the old impotent prick can't satisfy his wife? Jesus, I hadn't even screwed her yet. Mr. Peterson, I remind you again of your rights. Anything you say can be used against you at trial. We've got body cams, so everything you do and say is being recorded. It would be in your best interests to remain silent. Something at that woman cop's eyes got through to him. She looked pissed, really pissed. He clammed up and didn't say a word all the way through processing and being escorted to his cell. His mood darkened even more when he was told he couldn't get bail for at least 48 hours, the standard cooling period in domestic cases. Swallowing his pride, the next morning he called his father. After telling him what happened, he had to endure him laughing for a few minutes before he told him he'd start the paperwork, pay his bond, and get him a lawyer, only after Bobby committed to paying him back. By the time he got out, Amanda had removed any evidence of her ever living in the apartment. The witch had just disappeared and no one knew where she was. Well, her lawyer knew. That witch had been waiting outside the jail and had him served there. Amanda was on medical leave from her job until her face healed, and they couldn't or wouldn't tell him anything. His lawyer told him he was looking at jail time unless he could get her to agree to drop the charges. He saw Charlie Barton on the street a few days later. They were both headed to lunch at the same diner. He watched as every waitress in the place fawned over Charlie. He snagged his waitress. What do I need to do to get service like that? The waitress looked down at his hand on her arm, and he quickly released it. She gave him a big fake smile. Well, you could not be a wife beater for one. If you want what Charlie gets, better morph into a man who everyone respects, and try tipping better. She said it loud enough that everyone in her section heard it, and they all laughed. He was about to light into the waitress when the owner came over. Enjoying your burger, Bobby? Finally, a kind face. Yeah, it's great. Thanks. The owner smiled as she looked down at him. You're welcome. Now, if I were you, I'd chew slowly and enjoy every bite, because it will be the last you ever eat here. When you leave, don't ever come back. You're banned, as long as I own this place. I was married once, to a scumbag like you. I don't need you around as a reminder of bad times. This time the laughter was loud, and he went pale. He was so angry. Screw them. Screw them all. He'd show them. There will come a day when they wish they treated him better. He looked over to see Charlie sitting there, looking at him with a little half smile on his face. He had just about decided to go over and knock that smirk off the old man's face when 2 female cops, one city, one county, walked in and straight to his table. The county mounted took her big hat off and laid it on the table, then bent over and kissed his cheek. The city cop did the same thing, on the other cheek. The lunch crowd grinned, used to seeing it, and always laughing when Charlie flamed red. They sat, and the county cop looked over at him, the smile dying on her face. It was the witch who'd arrested him, and here she was smooching Charlie. Talk about collusion. She said something to the city officer, and she turned and gave him an icy stare. Then she went back to her meal, pausing every once in a while to tease Charlie. When they left their checks on the table, and Charlie paid for all, leaving a very nice tip. Bobby ate his meal slowly, out of spite. He left no tip, but the waitress grinned and wished him a nice day. As soon as he was outside, he saw it. The big yellow boot was as clear as day. Then he noticed the fire hydrant, 5 feet from his front tire. Damn it. Had that thing always been there? He picked the ticket off the windshield and walked to City Hall. $138, and it would be 4 o'clock before the guy could show up and remove the boot. Hell, he had to walk back to the office. Surprisingly, Rose hadn't fired him yet. Then again, no one had seen her for almost 3 weeks. They assumed she was working at one of the out-of-state offices. He kept his mouth shut and his head down, trying to do the best job he could, hoping he might get a fair reference when the hammer fell. Nobody said anything at the office, and it was business as usual for 2 weeks. Then the whispers started. No one wanted to make eye contact. Interactions became brief and hurried. He felt like screaming at them. This wasn't his fault. Bobby, even if he didn't know it, was a sociopath. His overinflated sense of self-worth made him tailor his past to meet his projected future. Only if he was backed into a corner over his lies and actions would he even come close to telling the truth. Once he was caught, he would turn on the charm, deflecting everything away from his actions, then start lying again. Despite his disintegrating relationship with his father and the uncertainty of his employment, he refused to let go of the belief that somehow he would emerge from the situation triumphantly. He was just about to doze off when it hit him. Faith. She had flirted with him lightly years ago when she would visit her mother's office on college breaks. He would seduce her, talk her into marriage. That would show them for sure. Having to sit in the church while they exchanged vows would be perfect. Feeling good for the first time in weeks, he went to sleep. The next morning, it all came back. Faith was a tempting target. She was almost smoking hot, a prettier version of her mother, with Charlie's height and high cheekbones. Every single man around had courted her, but none could get her to commit. She turned all down, saying she wasn't looking for a relationship right now, and wanted to make sure her business got off to a good start. Her business did indeed get off to a good start, thanks to her extended family. The vet they had used for years had become a bit senile, yet refused to give up his practice. Animals started dying, legal complaints were filed. Forced to pay increasing insurance premiums, lawyers, and fines, he had no choice but to close his practice. Faith, her 3 assistants, and the older vet who worked part-time were swamped. Deciding she needed more help, she advertised in the trade magazines for another associate, and ended up hiring 2, a man and wife team. The woman had worked as a staff vet at a zoo, and soon they were treating zebras, llamas, and an assortment of other privately owned exotic animals. It enhanced their reputation and their workload. Faith and the older vet also made rounds to the local farms for the births of horses and cattle and other things that didn't require office visits. In 2 years, her business was booming, and she had just about saturated her market. She thought about following in her parents' footsteps and opening other clinics, but she knew if she did, she'd end up administrating instead of practicing, and she didn't go to veterinarian school to be an administrator. Charlie and Rose were justifiably proud of her. Although Charlie let it slip he wouldn't mind seeing another generation of the family come into the world. She promised him faithfully, with a kiss to the cheek, that when events happened to trigger such things, she would let him know. When the pressure got too much, she would gather her single friends and they would journey to a large town, get a hotel room or 2, hit the bars, and let off a little steam. Carla and Vicky, another single from law enforcement, before they married, would take turns being the responsible one. Everyone else would drink, flirt, and dance. Occasionally one of them would hook up, but that wasn't really why they were here. Carla once caught a guy trying to slip Faith a doctor drink and beat the shit out of him, having the bartender call the local cops. They took the drink, had it analyzed, and the man ended up facing charges of attempted date assault, possession of controlled substances, and a concealed firearm. Seems there was a .22 automatic in his waistband. Charlie threw the whole weight of his wealth into making sure the man never made the same mistake again. Taking a plea bargain, he served 8 months of a 3-year sentence and was beaten at least once a month the whole time he was incarcerated. Seems he couldn't get along with the other inmates. He could barely walk when he was released and had vision problems in his left eye. He'd also learned how painful non-consensual sex could be, many times. Beaten again 2 weeks after he was released, he moved across the country and was never heard from again. Charlie smiled when he heard. Faith had a heads up from her friend at the shelter and wasn't surprised when Bobby brought the cat in. She was surprised, though, at how well the cat responded to him. She put on her professional face and filled out the required paperwork personally. Pet name? Lady Gray. She looked up in surprise. He actually blushed. It was, the only thing that seemed to fit. She just looks regal, don't you think? Well, she thought, maybe there was a real human being in there after all. Age? 31. One of her assistants giggled. Not your age, Bobby. How old is your pet? He thought back to what the shelter guy said. A little over a year. Where did you get her? Was she a stray? Did someone give her to you? Did you get her from the shelter? It's a rescue. Faith smiled and stopped writing. You can take her home now, Bobby. All rescues are automatically neutered or spayed. Make sure she has enough water. Feed her right. Bring her in for checkups occasionally. Pay her attention, and she'll be with you for years. Well, that plan went to hell, he thought. He stumbled through some small talk until she finally told him she had patients to attend to. He got the feeling she was laughing at him, which made him see red. He had an idea and pulled over just out of sight of the clinic, letting Lady Grey loose. She'd find her way back to the clinic. Faith would take her in and call him. He'd make sure he came back at closing time and charm her with his quilt and gratitude. Oddly, he felt disappointed and almost went back. Screw it. It's just a damn cat, he chastised himself. Besides, I'll get her back tomorrow. Faith recognized her instantly, standing beside her barn, looking lost. Come on, sweetie, let's get you inside, get you fed and bedded down for the night. Lady Grey purred in her arms and delicately ate the kibble she was fed. Eating as Faith finished her paperwork, she glanced down, admiring the sleek lines. Then she remembered who owned her and frowned. Impulsively, she grabbed the phone and dialed. Hi, Mom. It's me. She pulled the phone away from her ear until the excited babbling was over. Yeah, I know it's been a while. Wonder what could keep an only child from spending time with her parent? Oh yeah, I remember now. There was another flurry of babbling until she spoke, sharply. Emmo, shut up. You and I are going to dinner tomorrow, China House, 7 sharp. I'll meet you there. And Mom, we're going to have a serious talk. Be prepared. If I catch you trying to spin or evade any question, then we're done talking, for a long time. Bear that in mind. If you don't show, that'll tell me all I need to know. Good night, Mom. She shut the phone off, her mother still talking. Picking Lady Grey up, she settled her into a container for the night. The cat meowed pitifully, and despite herself she pulled her out. One night, and don't get attached. Lady Grey purred contently on the passenger seat, jumping out and stalking to the door of her apartment like she'd been there for years. No loud wailing. Behave yourself. Now, time for bed. Faith put her in the utility room on a bed made of towels, leaving water and food beside her. She woke the next morning feeling odd, discovering Lady Grey sitting on her chest, one paw gently flicking her nose as she purred. Faith grumbled as she got up, carrying her to the kitchen. What? You're my alarm clock now. I usually sleep another 30 minutes. Think you can behave while I get a shower? She sat and mewed constantly as Faith showered, completely surprised when the shower door opened and Faith gave her a shot in the face from the shower nozzle. Lady Grey let out a yowl and flew into the kitchen. Faith laughed and finished her shower. Lady Grey was on the kitchen table, licking herself dry and looking disgusted. Faith laughed and picked her up, rubbing her tummy. Object lesson, baby. Learn or get soaked. She stalked out, tail held high, and hopped into the passenger seat of the car like it was the most natural thing in the world. She jumped out at the clinic, strutting in like she owned it. And who is this? Asked one of her assistants, as she picked the cat up and ruffled her fur. That is the most regal Lady Grey. I imagine her owner will call sooner or later. Make our guest welcome, will you? Lady Grey tried to protest, but she was placed in a container until lunch, when she was freed for some exercise. She found Faith sitting under a tree out back eating lunch, and immediately jumped into her lap, even sharing some of her tuna sandwich. She spent the rest of the afternoon free, following Faith around as she did her rounds in the barn, straying occasionally to explore. Faith lost her, finding her inside one of the stalls, curled up in a ball on top of the colt, both sleeping contentedly. She took pictures before she lifted the cat up. Bobby had called by the time her rounds were over. She called back, saying that yes, she had his cat, and he could come over anytime he wanted, telling what a sweet creature she was. Something about his voice sounded off, and she asked Nancy to stay close when he showed up. Bobby was high. He helped one of his college buddies hide some income, setting up shell companies and offshore accounts. The friend proved to be a mid-level drug dealer, and he'd gotten Bobby started on narcotics, in mild doses. Bobby liked the way it felt, thinking it sharpened his focus and brought his intelligence to the forefront. He never did it at work, maybe just twice or so at home, or if he was out with his friend. The hammer had finally fallen. He hadn't been fired, but it was made plain they could no longer work in the same office. He was transferred to another office, one she rarely spent time at. To smooth the transition, Rose made him office manager, with a substantial raise. I am doing the best I can for both of us, Bobby. I can't be in regular contact with you, if I even have a chance to get back to my husband. We were both at fault here, so if you're thinking of legal action, you better reconsider it. Amanda gave Charlie all our emails, and if I have to, I can spin it to the point it will look like a woman going through a midlife crisis got seduced by a gold-digging younger man. We'd all lose, but you would be the biggest loser. Just take the promotion, work for a while, and when you find a better offer, you'll get a glowing recommendation and a healthy severance package. Trapped, he took the transfer. Bobby was happy. His plan was working. He was going to catch her again at the end of the day, really ramp the charm up, and soon she would be on her knees, doing anything he wanted. Just for a little insurance, he did a short line. The air seemed to glow as he walked to the door of the clinic. She let him in, not locking the door behind them. He smiled to see her holding the cat. Nancy was in the office, listening and watching the interchange. Well, looks like you made a friend. Then again, you were always lovable. Nancy had a vision of him as a big cheese ball and giggled. Faith smiled, but it had frost in it. Bobby, I don't know what your game is here, so let me spell some things out for you. First, I've always thought you were a sleaze, even as an 18-year-old girl. What you and my mother were planning makes me feel a little sick every time I see you. So, whatever you want, you're not getting it here. I suggest you take your cat and go. Better yet, leave the cat with me, and I'll make sure she gets a good home. He was shocked. She couldn't mean that. He was Bobby Peterson. Women didn't say no to him. Not now, not ever. Come on now, Faith. Why are you being so mean? I know you felt it yesterday. We'd be damn good together. The perfect couple, king and queen of the county. Well, gee, Bobby, let me think about it. What would I bring to the relationship? My good looks, money, social status? And what would you bring to it? A broke sleazeball on probation, one from jail time. Yeah, I can see a future here. Bobby had gone to trial on the assault charges, and thanks to a damn good lawyer and no prior record, got off with probation, on the condition he'd do community service and attend anger management classes. He went to the classes, laughing to himself the whole time how the pretentious which that led them could actually believe what she was spouting. He hadn't done his community service, and had a vague notion he'd try to talk Faith into let him do it at her clinic, so they could bond. Her sarcasm fueled his rage. Before she knew it, Bobby was at the counter, hand on her arm. She looked down and grinned. Might want to let go of my arm and get the hell out of my office. Only warning, she was giving him that tight-ass smile, looking at him like he was some kind of animal on her examination table. He slapped her without thinking, knocking the cat out of her arms. Lady Grey reacted instinctively, sinking her claws into his bare arm. He pulled it off him and threw against the wall as hard as he could. She slowly slid down, trying to get purchase, one leg hanging at an angle. Faith reacted, punching him with all she had, but it didn't get her loose. He dragged her over the counter, heading towards the door, ranting the whole time. Stupid witch. This could have been a whole lot easier. Now I am gonna have to train you the hard way. Faith was screaming, still punching. She got a partial hit on his balls, and he stiffened, before giving her a full punch to the face. Faith felt her nose break just before losing consciousness. Nancy has called 911 as soon as he touched Faith. She came screaming out of the back as he tried to drag an unconscious Grace through the front doors. She stabbed the tranquilizer dart as deeply as she could into his butt. It was the first thing she saw as she was coming out. Sometimes, if a large animal was in pain and wouldn't let anyone close, they used the dart gun. Bobby screamed at the pain and turned, knocking Nancy out with one punch. He almost made it to his car when the first cruiser came sliding in, blocking the driveway. Officer Wells jumped out, gun drawn. On the ground. Do it now. He still held Faith and put a hand around her throat. Back off or I crush her windpipe. Get out of the way. By then, Carla Martinez had arrived. Jimmy, he looks like he's putting the least bit of pressure on her. You drop him here? She had her taser drawn, sidling over to the side. Stay there, witch. She looked at Jimmy, mouthing distract him. Hey, Bobby, I might never get the chance again. So I want to thank you for being so monumentally stupid. Amanda and I are dating now. Did you know that? Said she wanted to try a relationship with a real man for a change. Man, she is just smoking, hot in the sack. And she jumps me almost every day. Says she didn't know what real lovin' was until she got rid of your slack butt. Jimmy was blowing smoke. They were dating, but they hadn't intimate yet. They both knew it was coming, but they were doing it right, getting to know each other before taking the plunge. Carla was angling around when the tranquilizer hit. He dropped Faith, slumping to the ground. She tasered him anyway, just to be sure. It took 3 ambulances, one for Faith, one for Nancy, and one for Bobby, complete with handcuffs for the gurney. Faith was treated for her broken nose, a concussion, and bruises and scrapes from being dragged across the parking lot. Nancy was treated for a concussion and kept overnight for observation. Bobby was checked thoroughly, blood samples were drawn. When the narcotics showed up, they got a warrant and searched his house. His stash was found. He was charged with possession of narcotics, violating probation, assault, aggravated assault, attempted sexual assault, and cruelty to animals. His probation was revoked, and he went to jail. Bond was set so high his father wouldn't be able to get him out without putting up almost everything he owned. He refused to take his call. Rose waited at the restaurant for 3 hours. By the second, she was crying, thinking Faith had blown her off. It was only after she turned her phone on that she noticed all the messages. She nearly fainted when she heard Charlie's last message. "God damn it, Rose. Crawl out from underneath whoever you're screwing and answer the phone. Faith is hurt and in the hospital. Your little boy Bobby assaulted her. He didn't do anything sexually. The cops got there before it got that far, but he's beat the shit out of her. As soon as you satisfy your needs, get your butt over here." She didn't know which hurt her more, the fact that Faith had been hurt, or that Charlie would use such crude language. Rose didn't even remember driving to the hospital. She just knew suddenly she was standing by Faith, sickened by her black eyes, broken nose, and bruises. She was bent over her crying, her tears making her gown wet. When she woke up, Faith woke up, realized who was holding her, and circled her arms around her. They cried together for a few minutes before Rose stepped back, holding her hand. "Sorry, I couldn't make dinner, Mom." "It's all right, baby. I am so sorry, honey. This is all my fault." Faith took pity on her. "No, it isn't, Mom. This was all Bobby. You didn't fit in anywhere." Rose knew she was lying but let it pass. They talked for about 10 minutes before the medication put her asleep again. She felt a presence and looked around, seeing Charlie for the first time in almost 3 months. Her heart jumped to her throat. He looked tired, older, his jaw set squarely, his angry face. She jumped in front of him. "Please, Charlie, we have to talk. You promised me you would if I answered your questions." He took her hands off his, gently. "I did, and I will. Unlike you, I honor my promises. But give me another 2 weeks. I'll email you. I'm going to ask you a favor. Stay the night with Faith. I have a couple of things to do, then I'll be back early tomorrow. Can you do that for me?" Wondering what could be so urgent in the middle of the night, she nodded. He left without another word. Bobby came to slowly, wondering what had happened. He started to move, discovering his hands wouldn't work. He looked down, to see them handcuffed to the bed rails. It all came flooding back to him, and he felt a flash of anger, which, she needed a lesson in respect. Then it hit him what he'd done, and he felt the first tendrils of fear crawl up his spine. He was in some pretty deep shit. Hearing a noise, he turned, and looked straight into the eyes of Charlie Barton. It took Bobby a minute, but when his head cleared, he saw the same thing. Charlie Barton. His eyes didn't blaze, his body didn't tremble. He sat there placidly, watching. Something in his eyes shot a shaft of reality through his addled brain. It all came back. Faith. The cops, the assault. "I am in deep shit," he thought. "Serious jail time. I can't go to jail. Dad. I have to get hold of my father. He'll take care of this." He looked at Charlie again, wondering why no one was guarding the door. He was drawn back to the eyes that didn't blink, didn't waver. The eyes of a predator. A tiger, maybe? No, they reminded Bobby of a documentary he'd watched once, when he was in his teens. It was on the Nile crocodile, one of the largest and deadliest predators on the planet. They would lie placidly on sandbars and riverbanks, then move with unbelievable speed, or slip silently into the water, to re-emerge like a ghost, lunging out and pulling prey into the river before they knew what hit them. The filmmakers had gotten underwater cams in place, and it showed in slow motion the death throes of some kind of deer-looking animal, struggling as the beast rolled, drowning and crushing his prey. Suddenly Charlie stirred, apparently noticing he was awake. Bobby, awake I see. I wanted to be the first person you saw when you woke up. I want to be the last person you see every night before you sleep. 8 to 10, Bobby, 8 to 10 years before you breathe free air again, according to the DA and my lawyers. That is, if you behave. He had stood, walking up until he was leaning over the cuffed man. Bobby felt sheer terror, straining against the cuffs. Charlie bent over, speaking softly. "You arrogant little witch. First my wife and now my daughter. If you think you can screw with my family and get away with it, well, just wait. You'll see what it costs you. I am to the point right now that I don't really care about the old 304 anymore, but you should never have touched my daughter. Bad mistake. Bobby, you broke her nose. Don't worry, you'll get to enjoy that feeling as soon as you're inside. Too bad, really. You're going to be very popular in prison. Giving head with a broken nose is going to be a little difficult." Bobby was struggling, trying to scream, but Charlie had a hand towel folded neatly, pressed to his mouth. Charlie continued in a calm voice as he struggled. "Don't worry, Bobby. We'll get you married off, and you'll be protected as long as you please your husband. I'll help out. After all, I want you to spend every day thanking me for keeping you alive. Oh, and don't worry, I won't let them mark your face. Need to keep you pretty. After all, they can tattoo your but all they want, though. Maybe your arm. Everybody that sees you after you get out that knows anything about jail will recognize a witch mark. Know what you did while you were there. A status symbol, sort of. It'll mark you as a good witch, after all. You might even get a few propositions. I may arrange another marriage for you." Charlie leaned over until their faces almost touched. Bobby felt increasing pressure and realized he literally had him by the balls and was slowly increasing the pressure of his grip. Bobby was screaming into the towel, little whimpers slipping through, until the pain got so bad he passed out, his vision slowly fading. Charlie's face indeed the last thing he saw as he lost consciousness. Looking down, Charlie felt no remorse at all. Everything he'd told Bobby and more was going to happen to him. He'd see to it. He tossed the towel down and walked out, thanking the duty nurse as he walked by her station. He was still pretty much out of it. "I just wanted him to know that I knew it was the narcotics and bore him no ill will. I'll pray for him." The nurse took it all in, thinking as he walked away what a saint Charlie was. She would never have forgiven him if it had been her daughter. Faith knew where she was immediately when she regained consciousness. Hospital smells are universal. She was surprised to see her mother sitting beside her, ashamed a little that she looked around keenly for her father. She touched her nose, remembering. Rose, sensing the movement, woke up, and the tears started. They talked, probably the most in-depth conversation they'd had in years. "I guess I am like Dad in a way, Mom." "Why?" Rose looked at her daughter sadly, a single tear trickling down her cheek. "You think I haven't asked myself the same question 1,000 times in the last few months? I've seen 2 different therapists, and they've both said the same thing. The success syndrome. As a person gains in wealth and power, they begin to think they're entitled, that they've transcended the normal rules of behavior, that they're above the understanding and judging of the masses. This is what I want, so I should be entitled to have it." Rose sighed. "Of course, I was very wrong. It just seemed to get easier and easier. I rationalized that surely he had figured it out by now, and if didn't say anything, then it didn't matter, and I was free to carry on. It made me arrogant, and arrogance got me caught." Faith just stared for a minute. "So you're saying if you hadn't been arrogant and gotten caught, you'd still be screwing around? If you liked it so much, why didn't you go for a divorce, especially after I got out of high school? They happen all the time. It would have hurt me, but I would have got over it a lot better than the situation we have now." Rose seemed horrified. "But I didn't want a divorce then, and I don't want one now. I'll change, go back to being faithful. You'll see, I'll be the perfect wife again, if he'll just let me." Mom, snap out of it. Listen to yourself. Let it go, Mom. You got caught, and practically admitted you've been doing it for a long time. Dad is never going to forgive you, and you know it. Accept the divorce when he starts it, and move on. Have all the toy boys you want, without having to worry about getting caught. I remember my psych classes, and I bet part of the thrill you got out of your flings was the fact that you were putting one over on Dad. I bet when you were home and you and Dad got intimate, the pleasure you got from comparing him to your string of lovers got you off big time." Rose blushed deeply, and Faith knew she'd hit her mark. "Help us all out here, Mom. Go quietly. Don't make us gossip fodder. Leave us a little dignity." The doctor arrived then, and the conversation got discontinued. Charlie waited until he saw Rose leave before he went into Faith's room. He felt a small pang of sorrow. He'd loved Rose for a long time, and never in his deepest fears did he think he would find himself in this situation. He put a smile on his face and opened the door. Faith smiled at him. Even with the black eyes and the nose splint, she looked beautiful. "You just missed Mom." Her smile faded when he nodded his head. "I know. Are you ever going to talk to her?" "Yes. Soon, at a time of my choice, in a suitable location." Faith hesitated before speaking. "I know it's not my place to ask, but please don't be too brutal. Let it go, Dad. Let her go. She's not the woman you married and hasn't been for a very long time. You're only 55. Find somebody and live a happy life." For once, joy didn't fill his eyes as he looked at her. Faith was frightened. She had seen her father's dark side once, when she was 7. Her friend came into daycare, with a black eye and bruises all over her body. She told her father about it over lunch. Later in the afternoon, she saw her dad, Mrs. Wright, the chief care provider, and Juanita go into the office. Juanita's father was a new hire, an Hispanic from Costa Rica who had a drinking problem. Faith had slipped away at playtime, wanting to ask if she could have Carla and Susie over for dinner. Seems they always had a carload of her friends every evening. She saw him and Jose go behind one of the fertilizer buildings. When she got there, Juan was out cold. Daddy was standing there rubbing bruised hands, and he reached down, pulled Carlos up, slapped him until he woke, and whispered something in his ear. Faith slipped back around and ran back to the daycare and never spoke of what she'd seen. Mom did ask why he had a scrape on his cheek and a black eye. He told her he dropped a couple of bags of fertilizer, and she lectured him about letting the people he paid for that job to do and be more careful. Juanita missed almost a week of daycare before she came back, brimming with news. Her father was in the country illegally and had been picked up and deported. Her mother and the rest of her family were facing the same fate until Charlie stepped in, sponsoring them, getting his lawyers to pave the way for green cards. He even hired her mom to help with lunch and assist the teachers. When he found out she had been a second-grade teacher in her homeland, she ended up spending much of her afternoons giving basic Spanish classes to the older children. Faith lay back after his visit, remembering her childhood, realizing for the first time how many of her happy memories were connected to her father, her mother just a minor figure. She realized now her mother starting disappearing from her life just about the time she opened her third office. Then it was a rush into the door, a quick kiss and cuddle, and leaving to go to her home office after dinner, totally ignoring her attempts to tell her about her day. Her dad became the primary caregiver. Her mother practically abandoning her made her cling to him more. She knew if she hadn't been so needy, he would never have added the daycare centers to his business. He was far and above a good parent and seemed to sense her every mood and need. It wasn't until she was in her first year of college that she learned he talked to the people at daycare, her doctor, and child psychologist to keep on the right track. It wasn't just schooling either. She thought about it now, knowing she became all the children he wanted, the tough tomboy, the frilly debutante, sometimes even the son he missed having. He taught her to fish, to shoot. She even learned to hunt. Charlie still had a picture of her in his office with the first deer she'd taken, a 4-pointer. She was 12. He molded her into the woman she was today. Assertive but fair, steadfast to her friends, true to her convictions, and though she tried to minimize it, brutal to her enemies when she had them. Charlie realized it, but Rose didn't. That money really didn't mean that much to Faith. Oh, she grew up as the princess in their country Camelot, had all the material things she needed and more. Thanks to her father, she never really let the money sway her. Oh, she would have a burst of extravagance once in a while, but it rarely lasted, and she would be back to herself in no time. When she graduated from vet school, her dad took her for a ride, stopping at a field halfway between their small community and the county seat. He handed her a deed. "I bought this for you. Take it down to Jerry's office and he'll do the transfer." Jerry was his lawyer. 26 acres. It should be enough. You can build a clinic, a small barn, paddocks, kennels, everything you need. The money will be available, but that's as far as I am going to be involved. Everything else is you. It's up to you to make it a success. She was touched and grateful. He accepted her hugs and tears, smiling at her happiness. They walked the property, and she was talking out loud about where she should place everything, asking his advice. He just grinned. Get a good architect and listen to his advice. They talked on the way back into town, and Charlie steered it back to money. "Look, you're my only child. Except for a few small remembrances, you get everything when I pass. Your mom has her business, so she doesn't need anything. She hasn't said, but I would imagine you'll inherit everything from her. You'll be the wealthiest person in the area, baby. Be careful, the leeches and wolves will be circling. Keep a good head on your shoulders, and you'll be fine." Faith thought a lot about money while her clinic was being built. $800,000 when it was finished, and the deed was free and clear. She leaned on the lawyers at first, rarely consulted Charlie, knowing she wanted to do it on her own. When the clinic was staffed and serving customers, she stepped back, enjoying her place in life. The clinic was operating in by the 10th month. At the end of the first year, she had to add staff. Then she added more staff. She was turning down customers because she was at the maximum of what she considered superior care for her customers. Briefly, she considered adding another clinic, then thought of her mother. No, she decided, this one was enough. When it came time for a family, she wanted to be there for her children. Faith knew that when she found a mate, he would have to be a strong person to be able to deal with her own forceful personality. So far, no one she dated fit the bill. The two private investigators met again at the end. 10 weeks of pretty intensive investigating. They'd turned a few stones and had found 5 lovers going back 6 years. Chuck looked at the last two, frowning. Glad he didn't live in that area. You know he's going to flip when he reads this. I know I would. Chuck nodded. You're right, but this is what he paid for, and this is what he gets. I for one don't intend to hold anything back. Damn sure don't want this blowing back on me. Me either. Let's make the call. They met in Chuck's office. After assuring the client they did not work together, but came pretty much to the same conclusions independently, they handed over their findings, both on disc and hard copy. It came to 4 banker's boxes, filled to the brim. The client sat, impassively, as they gave their reports, thanked them for their efforts, handing them checks, and left. Both privately were glad to see him go, making mental notes to keep an eye on the papers and television. Charlie went back to the farm, took the files out, made a pot of coffee, and started reading, keeping calm because except for the names it was what he had steeled himself for, until he got to the second most recent lover. Then he lost it, screamed in rage, and threw his coffee cup through the drywall. His hands literally shook for a few minutes, before he willed himself into stillness, setting his face into a bland mask, and started thinking. Rose sat at the conference table, her hands shaking so bad she tried gripping the edges to keep them still. It was finally here, the sit-down with Charlie. Knowing her chances of a happy ending were almost impossible, she continued to hope. On his insistence, the lawyers were left outside. He wanted the last episode of the Rose and Charlie show to be private. Charlie had to admit, she was looking good, easily passing for 15 years younger. Her skirt, while conservative, was a little short. Another ploy. He had always loved her legs. Her hair was styled in a way she hadn't worn in years, one she knew he favored. He had to appreciate her effort. She rose to embrace him, but he moved to the other side of the table. Not a good sign, she thought. Still, she greeted him brightly. Hi, Charlie. How are you? He answered her cordially. Well, as can be expected, Rose. I have to say, you really went all out today, didn't you? I appreciate it, but then you've always looked good to me. Rose preened. Yes, obviously I dressed to please you. Well then, thank you for your effort. He placed the thick packet on the table. Rose frowned. This was not going the way she'd hoped. He sighed. It was time for the tragedy to perform the final scene. If you remember, I asked you why, for how long, and how many lovers you'd had. Charlie held up a slim folder. Right here is what you sent me. He opened a really thick folder. This is what my investigators found. Shall we compare, see how well they match? Rose swooned a little. The loud noise only she seemed to hear had to be the doors slamming on her marriage. She waved a hand when she recovered. Don't bother. You knew when I sent it to you I was lying. Why beat a dead horse? Charlie ignored her, reading off the name of her last lover. Bob Walton, 40, married, 4 kids. Owns an insurance agency that you switched your office coverage to after your first session. Ever wondered what your lovers thought of you? Listen to this. He hit a button, and a CD started playing. Yeah, I screwed her. Pretty damn good for her age. I had fun, once I got past her wrinkles and gray roots. But without the business possibilities, in a bar maybe, there would have been no way. The term cougar is a kindness. More like a saber-tooth, about to go extinct. Rose recoiled in horror at her description. Before she could recover, Charlie continued. Pretty rough, huh? I stopped by 2 weeks ago, had a little chat. He got so upset he lost his lunch. I told him I was going to open an office either right beside his, or across the street. If he offered coverage for anything at, say, $100, I intended to offer the same coverage for $50 if I had to make the shortfall up out of my pocket. I'd give them an even bigger discount if they dropped him and came to me. Charlie half smiled, remembering. It was kind of pitiful watching a grown man cry and beg. I struck a deal with him. I told him if he got his wife down to the office and confessed the affair to her, I might not treat him so harshly. It was horrible, Rose. She brought her 5-year-old because he said it was an emergency. I took the child out to one of his staffers and had them take her for ice cream. To see her pain as he confessed nearly broke my resolve. She begged me, there at the end, not to destroy him, to think of her children. I thought that was telling. Her children, not ours. Rose had her hand to her throat, cringing at the monster before her. Don't worry, Rose. I didn't open an agency. I hear they're separated now. He's living in a back room of his office. Maybe they'll get back together. Who knows? Charlie shuffled papers, spoke a name. He'd gotten the man fired and mostly blacklisted. He moved 400 miles away and started over. He was already divorced, Rose. Seems you were just one of many. I really hope you use protection. I got checked out 2 months ago when it hit me. Still clear, but you know, AIDS and such have a much longer incubation. Rose didn't have the nerve to tell him she had a doctor at one of her out-of-state offices that screened her once a month. She noticed, after the meeting was over, that he missed one. Thank God. It could have gotten really intense. But then again, it wasn't a full-blown affair, just a drunken 2-day hookup. He went on until he got to her trainer. I kind of liked him, Rose. He didn't lie, didn't try to weasel out. Listen, she started it, came on to me. I had just come out of a pretty bad breakup. She cheated. Not me, and I was feeling a little insecure. We got together maybe 6 times in all. I am not gonna lie, back then at least, she was pretty good in the sack. I know how this works, mister. Rumors have been floating. If you would, I ask one small favor. I am in this business with 2 partners. If you destroy me, you destroy them, and they've never even met your wife. Let me sell out to them, protect them, then I'll take my wife and disappear. I am going home as soon as you leave and tear apart my wife's world. She has a good job, one she loves, one she has a pretty good chance of reaching the top in. If she decides to stay, I'll understand. I need to tell you this now. I don't know you, really don't like you for what you're about to do, but Rose spoke really highly of you. She even came by a few weeks ago for advice from a friend. I told her to let you go, but I don't think she listened. Stop with me. Don't try to extract any more revenge. Even now, I bet it's changed you into something less. Don't beat yourself up anymore. Try to get some peace in your life. Know what, Rose? He was right. Destroying those guys didn't give me more than a few seconds of satisfaction, so I stopped and left the trainer alone. Destroying them didn't make you Infidelity any easier to take, so I am done. It's over. Those descriptions they gave of the woman they slept with didn't remotely mesh with the woman you were at home. You've done it so easily for so long I would never trust you. Never. Jerry has the paperwork. It's pretty cut and dried. You keep everything you've acquired from your business. I keep everything from mine. It's all in the prenups anyway. You can have the house. The farm suits me just fine. No ghosts lurking in the shadows. No memories tumbling out of the closets. My will has already been changed, and Faith gets it all now. You don't need it. I had your finances investigated. Congratulations, Rose. You were always good with money. We're done. It will be a long time before I look at another sunset and not think of that night. Before I go, you have the floor. Anything you want to say now. He waited, patiently, while she pulled herself together. I am so sorry, Charlie. Even now, I don't understand myself, why I did the things I did. I still want a life with you, but I know that isn't possible anymore. I wake in the night and reach for you, and when it comes back to me I cry all over again. I am going to make you an offer, one I've thought about a lot. I won't fight the divorce, you deserve it, but if you need me for anything, call. Anything, understand? I want your promise that if you haven't found someone in 2 years, you consider dating me again. No strings, no promises, just 2 strangers trying to see if they're compatible. Can you promise me? No, Rose, I won't promise that. I will promise when the time comes. I'll think about it. That's the best I can do. Goodbye, Rose. Charlie left her, crying at the table. Jerry and her lawyer had spent their time going over the agreement, and both thought it was best for everyone. Rose didn't even read it, just signed where she was told to. She called Faith the next day, and she came out and spent a week with her, holding her while she cried for the first few days, crying with her at times. She would slip away now and then to visit her dad at his office and farm. He got misty-eyed at times, but seemed to be holding up well. Faith knew, though, that his pain was far deeper than her mother's, and watched him closely. So there it was, country Camelot destroyed, the king betrayed. But time marches on. Rose threw herself into her business, and in 6 years had doubled her offices. She played openly now. There was no reason to hide anymore. She still favored younger ones, but now she knew what was going through their heads and used them strictly for her own pleasure. At 61, she surprised everyone by marrying a man almost 70. She so gave her old home to Faith and moved into his modest mansion. Rumor floated in her offices that even though they seemed to be in love, he had performance problems and didn't object if she had discreet encounters now and again. Faith would check on her father sometimes, but she had a business to run and had met someone. He sold vet supplies, mostly mail order online, but every 3 months he spent a week or 2 traveling, touring the facilities he serviced to see if they required more or different products. He was tall, good-looking, with a soft manner that both animals and people, and he seemed incredibly strong. Faith was working with a stallion that could smell a mare in heat and was behaving badly. When he lifted his head up, he pulled her off the ground. The stallion was about to take off when an arm shot out and gripped his halter. The horse tried to toss his head, but the iron grip held him steady. The man was talking the whole time. Realizing he wasn't going to get his way, the stallion quieted. She had Nancy and her groom come and take him back to his stall. "Thank you," she said, holding out her hand. He was pretty worked up there. Carmela is in heat, and he can smell it. I would have lost control of him for sure. "I am Faith." "Charlie," he said, watching an odd expression flit across her face. "And don't sell yourself short. The halter would have had to break before you let go." Besides, he grinned, still holding the hand she had offered for a shake. "It isn't species-specific. Look at the fools men turn into when they meet someone they're attracted to." Faith colored a little bit, realizing he still had her hand. His handshake was firm but not threatening, and she could feel the heat. He reluctantly let go. "Nice to meet you, Faith. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to go do my job." He walked into the clinic, smiling. His gait was like his personality, strong strides that ate up ground, confident in where he was going. Faith finished her rounds and was slightly irritated to see her administrative assistant at the counter, lightly flirting with the stranger. And here she is now. "Faith, meet Charlie. He supplies most of our materials. He visits from time to time. You were off delivering a colt the last time he was by." "Charlie, meet Faith, owner and head vet here." "We've met," he said, holding out his hand. "How about some lunch? I am new here, so I don't know the good places. We can write it off." A salesman schmoozing the owner. Heather waited for the boom to go off. She'd seen her shoot down every man, customer, delivery guy, salesman, who had asked the same question. Shock didn't begin to describe it when she heard Faith ask him to give her a few minutes to freshen up. She approved of his company car, an F-150 with a locking top for the bed. He saw her look. "I can't stand little cars. This way I have room and can pack a whole bunch more samples and paperwork." That led to a discussion of various new meds on the market, and he surprised her by telling her his company had brochures that offered information about any procedure or surgery they performed, but also ones she could give away, giving tips on care and what diseases their specific pets may fall prey to, and what warning signs to look for. They pulled up to the diner and parked beside a truck that looked very similar. An F-250 equipped almost exactly the same. Faith grinned. She took his hand and headed straight for a table. A man in late middle age was there with a much younger woman, obviously pregnant and talking a mile a minute. She stopped talking as they walked up. "Hey Carla, one more month to go?" "Carla, Charlie." She turned to the older man. "Dad, meet Charlie, future husband, and Charlie, meet my dad, your future father-in-law." Everybody but Faith were caught with their mouths hanging over. "Gotcha. Seriously, Charlie, meet my dad. Dad, meet Charlie, my lunch date. What's the special today?" They all settled down. Carla and Faith talked baby almost non-stop, while the two Charlies talked about a wide range of things, coming to business last. Charlie Sr. was seriously interested in carrying a line of do-it-yourself pet care products, and when Charlie the younger found out he owned 4 possible outlets for his products, he was stunned. Faith slapped her hand on the table, catching everyone's attention. "Enough about babies and animals. What's on the dessert menu?" "Mary made banana pudding, but it's almost gone. I reserved one for Carla and myself when we came in, but you guys might be out of luck." Charlie Sr. said it grinning. If Faith found out Mary had banana pudding before she sat down, she would have ordered every serving she had. Faith was deeply disappointed. Mary made the best banana pudding in the state, even had the state fair ribbon to prove it. She had one more large serving, which she gave to Charlie instead of Faith, teasing her. Charlie promptly handed Faith a spoon, and they shared. He even let her eat most of it. The next time he came through, they again had lunch sans Charlie Sr. It was his week to travel. Carla had a son, and it was her first trip out to show him off. He wouldn't stop crying, so Charlie took him from his panicked mother and walked him around, crooning to him softly. In 3 minutes, the baby had stopped, and in 5 he was asleep. The diners watched, amazed and amused, as he gently placed the child back in his carrier. Noticing the looks from Carla and Faith, he grinned. "Well, it works with puppies, so why wouldn't it work for babies?" Faith gave him a big kiss on the cheek. "Just so we know, when our children get sick or are teething, you're going to be the guy losing sleep. I am just going to punch you awake and turn over." Charlie wasn't upset a bit. He just grinned and said that if he got to help make the babies, it would be worth it. Faith flamed red while Carla and another woman giggled. The third time he passed through, it was lunch, dinner, and a pretty good makeout session. They talked and texted constantly, and the next time he showed he didn't make any lodging plans, and Faith had arrangements not to be disturbed under any circumstances until Monday. The sex was beyond marvelous. He worshipped her like a goddess, and she discovered all his erogenous zones, especially his triggers. They made love on every surface of her house, and late Saturday night she bundled him up in her truck and took him to the farm, telling him to be quiet and help her with the quilts. Charlie, a light sleeper, heard them pull up. Grabbing the .357 single-action revolver he'd owned for over 40 years, he slipped out a side door and approached the barn door at an angle. He recognized her truck and stood beside it wondering, until a few pieces of straw and a giggle drifted down. Smiling quietly, he slipped back in the house and went back to bed. The only sign he found of the visit the next morning were the hay doors open. He shut them laughing, remembering it was a full moon the night before. When it got out Charlie was on the market, the vultures started circling. He got invitations to country club events, dinners, even a cruise. He smiled and politely declined every offer. Women from 20 to 70 made their pitch. At first it was too soon. Then it was a game. He'd announce where he was going to have lunch, knowing his assistant would tip off her friends, then go somewhere else. The place he blew off often got a spike in diet plate orders. He put a fence and a gate across his driveway. Only he and Faith had controllers. Not that he didn't play. He dated pretty regularly while at his out-of-town locations. He was so struck by one he actually took her to the farm. 2 weekends later he heard her on her phone, describing the changes she was going to make to the place once she had him hooked. He never dated her again. 10 months shy of his 60th birthday, there was a buzz at his gate. He was a little irritated at the interruption and was a little short on the radio. "Who is it?" "It's your cousin Cindy." "Open the gate quick. My car might quit any minute." "I can't recall a cousin Cindy. Not by blood, by marriage. Devin's wife. I got kids out here. You gonna let me in or what?" He frowned. Devin was one of the few people who tried to screw him, but she didn't say anything about him. And she did say she had kids. He opened the gate. A discolored old minivan, knocking and wheezing like every sound was going to be its last, pulled beside his truck. 3 kids poured out, asking where the bathroom was. A young girl about 13 emerged, and his mouth hung open. She was a dead ringer for Faith when she was that age. She was holding the hand of a 3-year-old girl. Cindy emerged last, obviously scared now that she was here. Then she squared her shoulders. "I am not going to lie. I am at the end of my rope here. Devin did the same thing to me he tried to do to you. Except he got away with it with me. He took the good car and every dime of money he could grab and disappeared. The only reasons he couldn't take off with my rings were because they were still on my finger. I managed to pull them off and hawk them. I didn't need them anymore, and we needed gas money. I didn't figure on such bad gas mileage though, and it took every dime to get me here." The little girl was fussing, and the 13-year-old asked Charlie point blank if she could have some food for the baby. He was stunned to find out none of them had eaten anything since lunch the day before, and it was dinner time now. He walked them all in the kitchen. "I got cheese and crackers. Give them that to snack on. Give little bit here some cereal. It'll fill her up quicker. Your mother and I will see to supper." He had a pork loin he was about to start smoking. Instead, he sliced it up and started grilling. One of the neighbors had left him a dozen ears of corn, and he got them on the grill. He put Cindy and Faith to making tea and lemonade. Cindy found a head of cabbage and made slaw. Faith microwaved some potatoes, and in 45 minutes everything was done. He felt fury at his cousin as he watched the kids gorge themselves, afraid of where their next meal would come from. After they were all sated, he walked down to the barn and made a phone call. They had a new county sheriff. John Goins was a retired SBI agent. Impeccable credentials, he was just cursed to be a Democrat in a strongly held Republican county. Still, he did surprisingly well against Sheriff Andy Rogers the first time. Maybe next election people would be ready for a change. 10 months before the election, Charlie paid him a visit. Blunt and to the point, he asked him if he was considering running again. "I want to, but I don't know if I'll have the support this year. Look me in the eye, John. Tell me you're a good man. One that will uphold the law fairly. A man that would never stab a friend in the back." "I am your man, Charlie." "I don't want you to be my man, John. I want you to be the county's man. I need you to talk to these boys I brought along and get back to me. All I ask." He got in his truck and left. Seems the guys he wanted John to talk to were campaign planners, used to working on state or higher level campaigns. They walked him through what he needed to do. John looked the plan over. "This is going to take a lot of money. Money I am not sure I can raise. It's been taken care of. For different organizations have already made sizable contributions, and more will come, as well as individual donations. Money is not your worry. Why is he doing this? If he wants a puppet, tell him I am not interested." He didn't say. All he said was he wanted you to be sheriff. "I've been doing this a long time. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I think it might be something personal between Charlie and Andy, but I am not going to ask or dig unless it affects your chances of winning election. Now, pay attention here. Suddenly, billboards popped up everywhere. Sheriff Andy wasn't worried. He'd beaten John Goins before. Then, people he had counted on, people that weren't even Democrats, came out in support of his opponent. Andy still wasn't worried. He had a secret weapon, Charlie Barton. He'd poured a ton of money into his last campaign, personally talked to a lot of swing voters, pulling them into his camp. Yeah, it might be a little tighter this year, but he still wasn't worried. Nobody in their right mind would run against Andy in the primary, and John won his easily, outdistancing his closest opponent by over 10,000 votes. Charlie still hadn't come forward. Andy, more worried than he would admit, decided to go see him. Charlie was waiting for him on the porch. Andy was surprised to see kids in the side yard, playing on what looked like a brand new swing set. He had a small girl on his lap, rocking her on the swing, trying to get her down for a nap. A young teen girl hovered nearby, ready to take the child after she fell asleep. He called her over. "She's out, Faith. Take her on in, and have your mama bring out a couple of glasses of tea, will you?" "Yes, sir, Charlie," she said, grinning. Andy couldn't get over the feeling he'd seen her before. He sat down on another rocker, thanking the woman that appeared with the tea. Good-looking woman in her late 30s, early 40s maybe. He waited until she left before grinning at Charlie. "You old dog, you. She's a little young for you, don't you think?" Charlie frowned. "It's Devin's wife and kids. He left her high and dry, so she ran home. Right here is as far as she made it. I took him in for a while, and there's nothing going on. I don't think she even likes me. What brings you out and about, Andy?" Andy took a sip of tea, smiling at how good it was. "Well, if she can cook as well as she can make tea, you might want to keep her around." When Charlie remained impassive, Andy got to the point. "Johnny Goins has a lot of momentum going, Charlie. It's to the point he's got serious juice. It's time to pull out the big gun, Charlie. You need to talk to some of those boys, get them back in the fold. And I need a little money for the war chest. Them billboards and banners ain't cheap. Where the hell did he get money for television ads? Those scumsucker are outrageous." It was a tell for Andy. In private, the more profanity he used, the more concerned he was. "I can't tell you how to save a bunch of money, Andy." "How?" "You can bow out. When your term is up, you'll never again hold a public office in this county." Andy was reeling. "How can you know this?" "I know this, Andy, because I engineered all of it. Johnny will get my vote and my money. I am even going to do TV spots with him. And Andy, all the money total that I put into all your campaigns, I am putting more into this one alone. You're toast, Sheriff Andy." Andy sat, glass of tea half raised and forgotten, staring at Charlie, trying to process what he had just said. A million questions ran through his mind before a few made it out of his mouth. "Why would you do this? We've known each other our whole lives. We were the brother each of us never had. We lied for each other, taking whippings we didn't deserve to save the other. I was in the same barn with you when you lost your cherry. We stood up for each other when we married. 50 years of friendship, Charlie. What did I ever do to make you treat me like this?" One of the private investigators Charlie had hired to investigate Rose had friends in the local police department. One worked vice, especially around the high-end hotels, and he reached out to him, showing him a picture of Rose. He was surprised at his response. "I know her. She's got some flower name. Iris? Daisy? No, Rose. I don't remember her last name. She keeps a suite at the towers. At first I thought she was on the pole. Lots of guys have that older woman fantasy, you know? But she's some kind of executive, seems loaded. It's all fun and games for her." Chuck asked if he remembered the last time he saw her. "I've seen her the last couple of months, but she's always alone. Looks like she had to cool her playing. I think she's married. Maybe hubby caught wind of her hobby. Anybody before that?" The cop laughed. "Yeah, funny story there. She was alone, dressed to be noticed. Dim lighting takes away a lot of wrinkles, you know? Anyway, there was like 50 cops from the area there, letting off steam after the seminar they attended was over. A few of them hit on her, and she flirted. But I don't think any she made contact with fit the bill. I was sitting with some hick sheriff, telling stories, and I pointed her out to him. He was out of his seat like he had sit down on attack. Pretty soon she looked up, called out his name, and he sat down. After that it was like they were alone in the bar. It got so bad we told them to take it upstairs or come up for air. They were on the elevator in 2 minutes." "So then," said Chuck, "it was a night of opportunity?" Charlie turned the little digital recorder off and stared at him. Andy sat back, a pale gray. "Charlie, listen to me. It was a one-time mistake. We didn't mean for it to happen. We woke up terrified, then promised that we'd go to our grave before we hurt either of you ever again. Please, Charlie, forgive me. So it was just the one time then? A drunken mistake? Booze and a strange place coming into play? You had no intention of continuing, letting it become a full-blown affair? That's exactly right, I pro. Charlie held his hand up and started the recorder again, continuing from where he turned it off. The voice of the investigator continued on. So then, it was a one-time hookup? The cop laughed. Hell no. He didn't come out of her suite the rest of the weekend, even stayed an extra day, had the deputy he'd brought with him moved in the last night. Don't know if they brought him into play, most likely to keep from explaining an extra hotel charge to the county manager. His name was Wilson, Warren, maybe Williams, I don't recall. Big sucker. He had to be 6'5" or better. Andy had slumped down, his face gray. He started to speak, but Charlie stopped him. I don't care how it happened. She most likely came on to you. But Andy, you were my best friend in the world. Even drunk, you had to know better. You had to know how I would react if I ever found out, and you did it anyway, all weekend long. We're done, Andy. Don't come here again. Do not under any circumstances speak to me again, unless it's in some official capacity. Go home and think about what you're going to do when you're no longer sheriff. You'll never hold a public job in this county again. Think about what you're going to tell Margaret if your lost weekend comes to light. How the people of this county will look at you if the truth ever comes out. Bite the bullet, Andy. Your career is over. Go quietly, with at least the illusion of dignity. Now leave. We're done here. Andy stumbled off the porch, sat in his cruiser for a minute, then drove down this driveway for the last time in his life. Cindy walked around the porch with a pitcher of tea. Was the sheriff crying when he left? Dust, most likely. Grace, the little 3-year-old, toddled out behind Cindy. Passing by her mother, she tapped his leg to get his attention. Chai, snuggle. He laughed and picked her up, holding on the swing, moving over to make room for Cindy. Don't get too close, Charlie. We'll be leaving soon. Charlie grinned. You keep saying that, and yet here we are. What are you doing with the housekeeping salary you've been drawing? I know you already got the kids registered at school using this address. A bit of her temper flared up. If I had enough money, we'd go now. You got us just like Devin, trapped? This caught him at the end of an emotional day. He got off the swing and walked in the house. 5 minutes later, he was back with a check and handed it to her. She looked at it and back at him in shock. It was made out to her for $5,000. Go down to the Jeep dealership on the way to depositing this. I told Vic to look for something used and reliable for you. Take what he gives you. It will be taken care of. Take this money and get settled. You can start at the store Monday a week. It won't be a fortune, but you can make ends meet, and the kids will get free daycare. Think you can be out by Friday? Cindy mentally recoiled. This was a reaction she hadn't expected. She thought she'd shake him up a little, get him to pay more attention to her. While she was considering her reaction, she heard a sob and turned to see her daughter Faith. Charlie had reacted when she introduced her, and she had smiled. Yeah, I stole her name, because I always liked it, and I thought it symbolized my future. Boy, did I get that wrong. Faith and Grace, the youngest, had really bonded to him. Both at the age where a father figure was most needed, she guessed. Charlie even took Faith with him from time to time when he went to visit his daughter Faith. Faith came out a few weeks after finding out about his house guests. She grinned when she was introduced to the newest Faith, remarking how much she looked like her at her age, even getting an old photo album out and showing her. Well, to avoid confusion, we'll call you Faith Jr. when I am around, okay? Of course, as time went by she ended up being called just Junior, and she grinned every time somebody said it. She was so impressed with the clinic Faith Sr. promised her a part-time job next summer, when she became old enough to be legal. Cindy turned back to Charlie, her voice softening. It doesn't have to be right now, Charlie. We don't have to be in a rush. No, you're probably right. I was getting too attached. It'll just make it harder on me when you do leave. Speaking of bonding, I told Hope and the twins we'd go fishing today. Maybe catch enough bream and crappie to have a fish fry tomorrow. I need to go get everything ready. He left her sitting on the swing. She sat with her head in her hands, listening to Faith slam things around in the kitchen. Hope was her 11-year-old daughter, and the twin boys were Jack and Jesse, 9 years old. He'd taken them into town and gotten them all simple rods and a filled tackle box. They went to his old house, Faith's now, driving down to the lake he'd built years ago. Charlie the younger was up, and they walked down to visit. Soon the kids had their rods in their hands, watching the corks intently. Faith Sr. had gone back to the house and came back with a cooler of water and drinks, and folding chairs for the adults. The only one who got to sit and relax was her. both Charlies staying busy baiting lines and removing fish, patiently training the children, helping at the end as little as necessary. They stayed 2 hours, long enough to get more than enough for the fish fry. The twins were ragging Hope because they caught more than her, saying girls couldn't fish as well as boys. When the rod Hope was reeling in went double. After 20 minutes of anxious coaching from both Charlies, Hope landed an 8-pound catfish, dwarfing anything the boys had caught. Faith filmed the whole thing on her phone. Faith Sr. told them that since they had done all the work catching the fish, they would have the fish fry at her house, on the patio. She saw her father flinch, and she got him to the side. Past time to let go of the pain, Dad. Time to make some new memories. Bring the rest of our new family by tomorrow. Turn them loose on the patio. In a few years, you'll look at it and remember things like the spot where Jesse threw up from eating too much ice cream, or where you watched your first grandchild take their first step, or where you look at the girls in sundresses instead of shorts and realize Junior and Hope aren't little girls anymore. He smiled before sobering. That's a beautiful dream, baby, but they're moving out soon. It's for the best. She's a young, beautiful woman. She needs to find a man her age. It wouldn't be fair to hold her back. Faith took a swing at his head, and Charlie stepped back, the smack landing on his arm. What was that for? For being a big dummy, that's what for. They talk to me, you know. Cindy has even called wanting to know your favorite foods. Ever notice how wonderful your meals always are? Junior has told me some things about their life. Devin was not a good husband or father. They were at the end of their rope, and God landed them in the driveway of the one man who needed them as bad as they needed rescued. Now suck it up. Stop dwelling in the past. Enjoy the future. It was always your dream to have a large family, Dad, and God gave you one. You gonna piss him off by refusing his gift? He stood, stunned. Really? Faith pushed him towards the door. Go. Take your kids home and clean them up. We'll clean the fish. Get ready for the fry. And Dad, I expect the whole family. You hearing me? All of them. Tie Cindy up and throw her in the truck if you have to. She snuggled up to him like she did when she was a little girl. Daddy, I got a surprise for you tomorrow, something I hope you like. He piled the kids in the truck, wondering what the surprise was all the way home. The kids piled out, telling Faith and her mother how much fun they'd had, and all about the fish they had caught. Hope was a little smug when they saw the catfish on Charlie's phone. The boys countered they caught way more crappie, so they were even. Hope was wise enough to let it go with a smile. After their baths and supper, the kids crashed. Cindy snuggled Grace with Faith and went hunting Charlie, finding him in his favorite spot on the porch swing. Charlie, can I talk to you? He patted the spot beside him and she sat, extremely close to him, purely by accident, of course. Let me tell you some things, Charlie, and please let me get all the way through it. I love Devin, but he wasn't much of a husband and even worse father. You've showed those kids of mine more attention in 6 months than he did the whole time I was with him. When the cousins caught him skimming, you stepped in and made it right. But you weren't a fool, so you got him the loan through the banks, set his payment so low you'd probably be gone before it was paid back. How did he repay your kindness? He skimmed off even more and ran. The loan defaulted, robbing his kids of their inheritance. I am just glad you ended up with his share of the farm and not a stranger. Charlie started to speak, but she stopped him. Hush now. It's taking a lot for me to say these things. If you interrupt me, I'll chicken out. As things got worse, I started dreaming about coming home. You think it's an accident I came here first? Of all the family I knew, you would be most likely to help me. And you were everything I thought you'd be. Kind, attentive, to the kids anyway. I know I was mean-tempered for the first few weeks, but remember Charlie, I had been through a lot. I couldn't feed or shelter my family. I was a little ashamed, living on your kindness. When I told you I needed to get a job, you started paying me to keep house. How is that fair? You are the neatest person I know. Cleaning up after you was nothing compared to chasing 5 kids. She gripped his hand. Somewhere, Charlie, somewhere along the line I realized there were still good men in the world, and I was living with one of the best. I'd watch you with Grace, how you were with Faith, answering her endless questions, how you bolstered Hope's confidence, how you treated the boys. Those kids would die if I took them away from you. She swallowed. Thinking here comes the hard part. She'd her feelings battered all her life. If he rejected her now, she would never have confidence again. And as I watched you, Charlie, I realized I wanted them to be with you as long as possible, because that's how long I wanted to be with you. I love you, Charlie. Did you hear me? I love you. Not as a mentor or father to my children, but as a woman should love her life mate. I am not your ex, Charlie. When I love, I have tunnel vision, giving my heart and soul to my husband. I am begging you here, Charlie, to let us stay with you, at least until you decide whether we have a future or not. One more thing and I am done. I don't care about the age difference. I am 40, you're 59, big deal. And I don't want your money. Keep it all, give it to Faith, as you should. Our life together will be enough. Connie started snuffling into his neck, waiting. Charlie sat for long enough for her to be really nervous. If that's true, why were you set on moving out? Oh, Charlie, it broke my heart when you gave me that check. I didn't want to leave. I wanted you to ask me to stay. I don't have a lot of confidence, remember? I wanted you to make a move. That's why I am here now, trying to correct my mistake. He at her, frowning, and she knew she'd lost him for good. Then he bent down and kissed her. It took a second to process, then she kissed back. He finally broke it off, grinning. It's a damn good thing you're so good looking, because you aren't real smart. Ooh, he thought she was attractive. Wait, did he just call her dumb? He continued before she could focus. Did it not occur to you even once just to tell me how you feel? Because I'd had feelings for you for a while now, but the age difference held me back. Look at how much time we've wasted. If he thinks he can call me dumb and wait, he has feelings for me too? I love this man. They sat on the couch making out until the light in the kitchen came on. One of the kids up trying to get a glass of milk or sneak a snack. Connie jumped up, kissing his forehead. This discussion isn't finished, she whispered as she slipped into the house. He smacked her bottom, grinning. It damn sure isn't, little girl. Oomph, she thought. I'll show him, little girl. The next day, all the kids watched stunned as Cindy plopped in Charlie's lap and gave him a kiss during breakfast. Hope and Faith got it right away. They'd explain it to the twins later. Kids, your mom and I have to go into town for about an hour, maybe a little more. Promise me you'll be good for Faith, or no fish fry. For any of us. Understand? They all agreed, and off they went. When they got to the dealership, Charlie told her to choose anything new on the lot that could handle the family. I thought I was getting used? Used was for leaving. New is for never leaving, understand? Never leaving? That meant... She threw her arms around him, kissing him solidly. The sales manager stood there grinning. Wait until the guys and gals at the diner hear this. Looks like the old fox was trapped at last. 90 minutes later, Connie was driving her new van home. Home. Boy, did that feel good to think. The kids piled out to look at their new ride, climbing all over it. When they drove up in the new van, Faith smiled. Looked like Dad could still be trained after all. She kissed and hugged all the kids, including Grace, who was firmly anchored in Charlie's arms. Connie Jr., can you guys help me lay everything out? TY, the nickname her Charlie had gotten, it stood for the younger, has been frying for 15 minutes. There ought to be enough to start on. It was a grand afternoon. They ate, lazed. Faith had put up the badminton net, and she and Junior played against Hope and Charlie TY. The boys found the horseshoe pits, and Charlie Sr. taught them the basics, then left them to kick a few brightly colored balls around with Connie and Grace. When it came time to leave, Junior pulled out an overnight bag. Seems she and Grace were having a sleepover. Hope and the boys were worn out, and after their baths were out like a light. Charlie and Connie were soon dueling tongues on the porch swing. Hands wandered, clothes were loosened, fingers explored. Damn it, if it weren't for the kids eyed. Connie stopped him laughing. What about the kids? If this happens, you're never getting out of my bed. They're bound to hear us sooner or later. I still would rather we had some privacy. Well, honey, unless you know of a place I don't, we're just going to have to wait. Charlie looked across the yard, frustrated, as a beam of light from the full moon broke through the clouds and hit the barn. Come on, he said, grabbing her with one hand and the old quilt with the other. Connie wondered until they got to the door and started giggling. Really, Charlie, the barn loft? Are we 16, sneaking off from our parents' eyes? No, honey, we're two consenting adults on our own property, sneaking off from our kids. Now get that hot butt up that ladder. Just as he hit the top of the ladder, the dress flew over his eyes. By the time he got it out of his face, she was naked on the blanket, the full moon draping her body with mystic light, and they made love. Rose felt old finally, and alone. She was probably making as much or more as Charlie now, but she knew it was never a competition with him. The only thing that interested Charlie about money was to make sure he had enough to take care of the ones he loved. In the last 5 years plus, she had a buffet of lovers, all ages, down to a 19-year-old hung very well with great stamina. But after they were done, she felt hollow. Rarely were they allowed to spend the night, and when they left, Rose would curl up in a ball and dream about arms that held her lovingly all night long. Andy had called her after his showdown with Charlie. She had little pity. You should have slipped out right after we screwed. We would have gotten away with it. You're the one who wanted to stay the weekend. You better hope he never finds out the truth about your deputy. I can't believe you talked me into a three-way. Anyway, Charlie is real fond of William's wife, so if he finds out for sure, he'll tell her in a heartbeat. The conversation went downhill from there, but it got her to thinking about Charlie again. She had seen him 3 times in the last 4 years, twice at funerals, and once in a restaurant at one of his out-of-town stores. She thought about going over, but he had a woman with him, and it was obvious it wasn't a professional lunch. Little displays of public affection from the woman put that to rest. Oddly, a pang of jealousy rose, which needed to keep her hands of my man. Then it hit her, he wasn't her man anymore, and hadn't been for 5 years. She needed to let her fantasies go. She slipped quietly out, leaving the cost of her uneaten food and a nice tip. Rose had approached him at the second funeral, making small talk about Faith until they were alone. "Charlie, remember that offer I made you when we parted? It's past time. Have you given it any consideration?" He looked pained at the memory. "Yes, I remember. Sorry, Rose, but I'm not taking you up on it. Too much baggage, too much to work through for me to make it worth the effort, in my case. Anyway, have a nice life, Rose. We'll see each other from time to time. After all, we need to get our daughter married before the clock starts ticking. Now you'll excuse me, but I have to go." She watched him stride off, and her heart broke all over again. He still looked good, still kept in shape. If anything, he was a little thinner, and it looked good on him. What a fool she had been. She was spending the night with Faith, which she did regularly when she was in town. She met Charlie Ty and knew from the look in her daughter's eyes this was going to be her son-in-law. She liked him quite a bit before she realized why. He was a clone of her Charlie, sharing almost exact views on almost everything. She and Faith had healed their rift, to the point that she still took the annual shopping trips with each other. It wasn't quite as much fun, because Faith was really conservative until it came to lingerie, and then she had a really vivid imagination. Rose looked at some and wished things like that had been around when she and Charlie were young. He may not have grown old. She knew Faith was buying them for her Charlie. She made one comment on a selection. "That's beautiful, but it can't be comfortable for very long." "Mom," giggled Faith, "these things aren't meant to be worn for long periods of time. They're meant to be admired and removed as quickly as possible. If my Charlie leaves anything like this on me more than 5 minutes, I throw it away." Rose smiled. Rose woke from a light sleep, reliving the dream she'd just had of her and Charlie in a hayloft. Making a spur-of-the-moment decision, she slipped quietly out of bed, put on the things she brought with her, and quietly left the house. Soon she was at the entrance to Charlie's drive, surprised the gate was still open. As tired as everyone was, and with Charlie having 4 beers, Connie had drove and forgotten to push the button. She parked on the backside of the barn, trying to work out a plan as she walked to the door. Halfway there she stopped. What was that sound? Then she heard voices. "Charlie, you excited old goat. I am not on the pill. I could get pregnant." Rose heard the heavy breathing as they recovered from their passion. "Damn it, Charlie, if I am pregnant, I'll..." She heard Charlie laugh. "If you're pregnant, we're naming him Junior, and we'll dote on him the same way we do all our children, for the rest of our lives. I hope you were pregnant. As a matter of fact, I think we should do it again, just to make sure. Are you in?" Connie reached for him, laughing. "What if it's a girl?" "It's a boy. I can feel it. If, on the stray chance it is a girl, do you think Faith the Third is redundant?" "Oh, Charlie. That feels good, baby. Let's talk about..." Rose turned, almost blinded by tears, her dream broken, and drove home. She left the next morning without explanation. 2 years later she met Freddie, 6 years her senior, but in good health and very attractive for his age. They clicked and spent time together. She still played, but kept it away from them. When he asked her to marry him, she said no, and told him of her past and present, being brutally honest. She was surprised by his answer. "I am impotent, Rose. Have been for 5 years. There isn't a pill or procedure out there that would help, and I've checked everything. So if we marry, it will be for love and companionship. I'll allow you to play to satisfy your urges, as long as it's discreet and far from our home, if you promise to always come back to me." Rose was stunned, then accepted. She introduced him to Faith and her now son-in-law Charlie, relieved when they accepted him. They attended the small wedding, wishing her the best. Charlie sent a gift, a cruise of European rivers and towns, first-class tickets, the honeymoon suite. It was one of the things she and Charlie talked about when they were young that they never got around to. For 2 more years Rose played, no more than twice a year, until she finally lost the taste for sex. She and Fred, fueled by the cruise Charlie gave them, took a world cruise, and had many small excursions until Fred started having health problems. He died when Rose was 70. She had sold her business when she married, putting half in a trust fund for Faith. Faith was astounded at the number and thought briefly about refusing it until her baby kicked, a little girl this time. She'd keep it for her and her son, and the ones that would surely follow. When Rose passed at 75, Faith inherited the rest, plus the estate Fred left, twice the size of the one Rose had. He left Faith a letter. "I never had children, but I've often wished I could shake your father's hand for raising such a child. He taught you well, and the way you accepted me, even introducing me as your child's other grandfather, made me realize what I'd missed by being unable to father children. So take the money, daughter, for all the love you gave me." Suddenly, Charlie T.Y. was married to the richest woman in the state. Does this mean we can afford more kids? They ended up with 5. Charlie looked at his bride, breathtakingly beautiful, and laughed inwardly at the people in attendance, having been here just 5 weeks before for another wedding. Faith had gotten them alone for a few minutes at the fish fry. She seemed nervous. "Dad, remember when we were talking about the new memories of the patio? The part where I talked about watching your grandchild take his or her first steps? Well, in 7 months, we'll know if it's a boy or a girl. So figure 18 to 20 months from now, and we'll see that very thing." She sat back, nervous, waiting for his reaction. Charlie sat back stunned. He felt like he was on information overload. First, that he finally found a new mate, and second, that one of his fondest dreams was coming true. He couldn't help it and broke down. The first time in his life he'd ever cried in happiness. He was instantly surrounded by his blended family. Junior and Grace were on his lap instantly. The rest, right down to the boys, were crying too, scared. When the truth came out, smiles broke out like sunshine, and everyone hugged Faith. The two Charlies got together. "You know it's gonna be a big wedding, right?" T.Y. sighed. "I know, but it'll just be a ceremony. We got married in a civil ceremony as soon as we found out. It was the right thing to do." Charlie Sr. smiled at the excellent choice his daughter had made. "Just telling you. Her mother has been planning this since she saw the sonogram and realized it was a girl." Rose was over the moon, but the timeline got her to tone it down a little. Nonetheless, 5 weeks later, the little Baptist church overflowed as Charlie and Faith renewed their recent vows. The reception had to be held in the civic auditorium because of the number of guests. Rose was proud of Charlie for his answer when the preacher asked, "Who gives this woman in matrimony?" And Charlie said loudly, "Her mother and I do." Connie and her brood kept to the background, but she saw the interactions between her and Charlie and the kids and smiled a bittersweet smile. Looked like Charlie got the large family they'd always wanted. Too bad it was with someone else. Putting it behind her, she mingled. The sins of the past were forgotten, and people she hadn't spoke to in years sought her out. She found it telling that while Sheriff Andy's daughter was a bridesmaid, Andy didn't attend. Her mother was there, and Rose made sure they were never in close proximity. She also frowned when she saw that Amanda Williams and Carla Bishop were going to be bridesmaids, but apparently they didn't know. For weeks later, Connie came screaming into the living room, holding a strip of paper. The kids came rushing as Charlie laughed and Connie unloaded on him. "You excited old goat. I told you this would happen. You a-hole. 40 and pregnant. What are we gonna do?" She collapsed into his arms, crying her heart out. He raised her head and kissed her. "It means we're going to do what we set out in the barn. We're going to raise this child in love, treating him with the same love we have for the rest of our kids, okay? Of course, now I have to marry you. The crosses I bear." He gave a big dramatic sigh. "When she comes along, you're taking your turn with the diapers and the teething and the colic. And you're going to be a sports dad, but don't worry, the ones we got now will have you pretty well trained by then. And how do you know I'll marry you? I think I'll put it to a family vote, and you're excluded. Kids, how many of you think it would be a good idea for me to marry this old goat? Could you put up with him while you grow up? I know, he's pretty old, but he's in good condition. If we watch him like a hawk, keep him away from bad things, he might last a while. What do you think?" She counted hands. "Well, it looks unanimous. So, old goat, you're stuck with us. No backing out now." "Wait," cried Faith. "It isn't official yet. He hasn't actually asked yet, and I don't see a ring." "Really, Dad? This is how you want to start out?" Hope giggled, mimicking Faith. "Yeah, really, Dad?" Grace, not understanding, copied her sisters. "Wee, Dad." Charlie laughed, long and hard, standing up and dumping Connie in the floor. "Boys, help you poor old pregnant mother up. The daughters and I have a shopping trip to make." Soon Charlie and the girls, including Grace, were headed to the jewelry shop. The owner, of course, knew Charlie and was surprised to see him come in with children, all girls. He was even more surprised when he told him the purpose of the visit. "Jack, what you got in the way of engagement and wedding rings?" "I got a pretty fair selection, Charlie." "Who they for?" Charlie looked surprised at the question. "Why, they're for me, Jack. Or more correctly, they're for the woman I am asking to marry." "Now, what you got?" They looked at every high-end set and solitaires he had. The girls even tried a few on. Seems Faith was the same size as Connie. They finally picked a nice set, nearly the most expensive thing they had. Then Charlie surprised the jeweler once again. "Jack, you got matching bands to fit the girls? I am not just marrying her. I am marrying the whole family." He turned to the girls. "Would you like that? You can wear them on your pinky, look down, and know you're part of a loving family." The cheers woke Grace up, and a saleswoman helped him pick out a tiny ring just for her. She cooed as she looked at it on her tiny finger. He tried to get it off, but she refused, closing her chubby little fist tightly. They walked out, the sized rings on their pinkies, with a brightly wrapped box. The jeweler watched them go into the local steakhouse before flipping the close sign over. It was 11:30. He looked at the surprised saleswoman. "Well, come on. Which do you want, the diner or the sub shop? Do you want someone else to announce that the old silver fox finally got caught?" She grabbed her purse on the way out. "I'll take the sub shop, you take the diner. And I probably won't be back until 1:30. Jack nodded. "Good idea. See you then." They went out the door in different directions, almost running. By the close of business that day, almost everybody on that side of the county knew about the engagement. Charlie and the girls enjoyed the meal and the stares. Seems someone bolted out of the sub shop and ran in, whispering "Toddy hostess." Soon the whole place was abuzz. Finally, one of the oldest ladies in the restaurant approached him. This woman had been his babysitter, had taught him to play the piano. He still played. "Is it true, Charlie?" He started to tease her but stopped. Give her her little victory. "Yes, it is Mabel. Let me present my new daughters. This is Faith. This is Hope. And this little one is Grace. They'll all be needing lessons. Do you think you might have a spot for them? Got a couple of boys too, but I don't know if they're interested. I'll give you a call. Now, Mabel, it's time for me to take my girls home. See you later." Charlie thought it was the fastest he'd ever seen a 76-year-old woman who was supposed to have arthritis move as she made a beeline to her cronies. One thing became clear as they were rolling down the highway. In all the excitement, no one thought to ask who he was marrying. Bet that would drive them crazy. Connie and the boys were waiting on the porch. Connie lit into him as soon as he stopped rolling. "Listen here, old goat. Just because you buy a ring doesn't mean I am going to like it. I might not want—" "Oh my, that is so pretty." Charlie dropped to his knee. "It's yours, little girl, or it will be as soon as you say yes. Connie, will you marry me?" "Yes." The scream was so loud horses 2 farms overshied at the noise. Then she was in his lap, sobbing. When she calmed down, the girls showed her their rings, and she started crying all over again. So they walked down the aisle. Grace was the flower girl, grinning in her satin dress, strewing blossoms at random. Faith stood for Connie, while Junior and Hope looked stunning. He got a twinge as he looked at them, remembering Faith's words on the patio. TY stood for him, with the twins beside them, looking uncomfortable in their suits. Things went according to plan until he got to kiss the bride. As they broke, he felt a tug on his pants. "Kiss me too, Daddy," said Grace. The crowd broke into laughter as he picked her up and shared a kiss with her mother. They honeymooned on a beach, soft sand and romantic nights. They made love as often as they wanted, tried snorkeling and loved it, parasailing not so much. They came home a week later, picking up their brood from Faith, showing the kids pictures of where they were, and promised them a family vacation the week before school started. The sonogram showed it was a boy, and Charlie smirked. Connie, of course, called him an egocentric old goat. He called her little girl and rubbed her bottom, while made the nurse giggle and Connie matter. She chewed his ear all the way to the truck, then felt bad and nibbled on it on the way home. They both decided nibbling was much better than chewing. Charlie Jr. arrived with no trouble, completely healthy. They had been a little worried because of their age, but decided they would love him however he came out. Over the years, Faith got a charge out of introducing them. "Hi, I am Faith. This is my little sister Faith. This is my husband Charlie, my father Charlie, and my brother Charlie. We don't have a lot of imagination when it comes to names." Faith Sr. had 2 girls and named one Rose for her mother, and the other Constance for her stepmother. That helped the name confusion tremendously. As Charlie sat and thought about his children near the end of his life, he had to admit to himself that Faith Jr. was the closest to him. She worked one season for her sister, before deciding she didn't like blood and sick animals. She liked the clinic cat, a dowager with the apt name Lady Grey. She only had 3 legs, but still moved with grace. Faith Sr. said there was a story behind her, but she wasn't old enough to hear it yet. So she started spending after school and summers following her new dad around. She worked in the garden centers part-time, learned the hardware business from the ground up. She was in accelerated classes in school and would graduate at 17, already accepted into 4 schools with excellent business programs. She was his heir apparent and would be taking over from him when he stepped down. Hope, it turned out, had a knack with plants. At 13, she had talked Charlie into buying her a tiller and giving her a plot of ground, and much of the family food came off it. Soon she had talked him into buying a breed of almost extinct sheep, part of a conservancy effort. She followed that with the threatened marsh pony, which brought the boys into the fold. Between them, they have one of the most respected breeding programs in the country. Seems Hope may follow Faith somewhat in her career choices. I bought her a small tractor and implements, and got one of the cousins to teach her the basis of operation and safety. I had to stop letting the cousins store hay in my barn, because she stored hers there now. She was 17 now, and grinned at me as I helped her stack it in the loft, the boys putting it on the conveyor below. Seems she liked bales instead of those big rounds. Now, Dad, I am going to feed this to my animals, so no breaking in the bales, understand? I just grinned, knowing when the mood hit us we would be up the ladder. Little Grace wasn't so little anymore. 10 years old now, she was turning into a carbon copy of her mother. I cringed, barely putting up with Hope and Junior dating. I needed to buy more shotguns. Grace was a piano prodigy, playing complex pieces far above anyone in the area. 4 states away wanted her to board there while she learned, but she refused, compromising by spending half her summers there. I knew as she grew and became more comfortable, it would only be another year or 2 before she made the move. I hated it, but wouldn't begrudge her talent. That left Junior, barely past toddling. I'd have kids around until I passed and enjoy every one of them. With the money I'd accrued, they would all be set for life, but I put it all in trust funds for them, with conditions. They had to graduate college. If they didn't, it added 5 years to the terms of the trust. And they all had to hold jobs and live within their means for 2 years before the trust became available. I apologized to Faith Sr. for depleting her inheritance. She laughed, saying her mother would make up any shortfall, and who was she to deprive her brothers and sisters of their share? The truth finally came out a few years after Sheriff Andy lost his re-election bid, and his wife left him. He was working for a private investigator 2 states away, making good money until he had to start paying alimony. He remarried several years later. It lasted about 4 years when he discovered her cheating by accident, while investigating someone for suspected infidelity. He was screwing around with Andy's wife. They divorced, and he never remarried. When Amanda found out, she divorced him, not just for that, but for another affair she just caught him in. It was with an ADA, and when a case went south because of the relationship, the new sheriff fired him. Oddly, a year later, Amanda started dating John. He was 12 years older than Amanda, but she caught Charlie at lunch one day, told him about it, and grinned. Apparently older guys are a lot more trustworthy. They married when she was 38 and he was 50. Carla and her husband lived together until death took him 48 years later. She never remarried, retiring as chief detective for the county and coming out of retirement 2 years later for sheriff after John retired. She won and served 2 terms before retiring for good. Charlie passed away 2 months after his 79th birthday, 4 weeks after watching his youngest son graduate from high school. Cindy never remarried and joined him 15 years later, laid to rest beside in the Baptist cemetery. Rose had chosen to be cremated, her ashes mixed with Fred's, and poured into the ocean off one of their favorite vacation spots. When Charlie passed, they had to hold the funeral in the local high school football stadium. 800 Bartonians vied to carry his casket, and they had to have a lottery to decide the matter. The rest walked ahead as a self-appointed honor guard. He was carried to the burial site in a horse-drawn hearse, pulled by marsh ponies Hope had raised. Sheriff Carla led the procession. There was an unofficial registry, and as far as can be determined, Charlie had funded close to 1,000 kids deserving college educations. That wasn't counting the numerous Bartonians he'd funded. In attendance at his funeral were 7 members of Congress, 2 governors, multiple state and all local office holders, 5 agents of the FBI, 29 police officers of different districts, and an assortment of teachers, lawyers, scientists, and business people who owed almost everything to his generosity. There were also several movie and television stars, all because of Charlie. His ruthlessness against his enemies never came to light. For one, because no one would believe them, and for another, they were closely guarded secrets. Bobby Peterson woke up to a pounding headache, touching his nose and groaning. It was his welcome to prison present, as Charlie had promised. He couldn't believe the judge gave him a sentence that meant he wouldn't be up for parole for 12 years. He got 18 months added for breaking the cat's leg when he threw it. What a holes! It got worse when he found out he was going to serve his time at Rockwell, a supposedly medium security unit with the worst reputation in the state. He'd been inside for 12 hours before his nose got broken, spent another day in the infirmary before being assigned a cell. The man was huge, 6'8" and 300 pounds, mostly bulging muscles. He backed Bobby into a corner when the guards left. Here's the deal. Someone I'll never know is making sure my mother has the health care she needs and a decent apartment as long as I keep you in line. So listen close. You're my women from now on, until I leave. You do what I say, when I say it, and you don't talk back. It would be very bad if you talked back. And I can beat the hell out of you anytime I want, as long as I don't touch your face. You will let your hair go long, and one of the older witches will teach you how to use makeup. You're gonna be my women. You're gonna look like a woman. Now, get those clothes off and crawl over here. You need to show your new daddy how special you are. Bobby sobbed softly as he disrobed, then dropped to his knees and crawled over. Charlie was right. With his broken nose, he almost passed out from lack of oxygen while his daddy beat up his face. In 6 months, Bobby looked so much like a woman there were actual fights over him. The inmates made a game over tattooing their gang signs onto his butt. By the 5th year, it was so covered there was nowhere to put a mark. He had a new daddy by then, who had some kind of deal from the outside that kept him reasonably safe. He cried like a baby when his daddy got released. After 3 months of being traded like baseball cards by his new daddy, he was suddenly released early for good behavior. His father had quit seeing him after 6 years, and there was no one to meet him. So depending on how you look at it, no matter what Charlie put him through, he found his only version of happiness in the end. Bobby read about him dying. News carried by the national chains because of the ones attending the funeral, and it barely made a dent in his consciousness. Besides, the second child he had adopted was teething and having a terrible time. He walked him, cooing to him, feeding him ice chips until he went to sleep. Oddly, his name was Charlie. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.